Brantford Brant Community Conversation on Homelessness. And my name is Tracy Flaherty-Wilmot with Code Consulting, and I'm going to be helping out in terms of moving things along today. And the primary reason why I'm doing the MC role is to really allow the City of Brantford staff an opportunity to truly participate in this community conversation. So bear with me. Those of you who have met me, you know that I'm a Newfoundlander, right? And so as I get excited, I'm going to speak faster. Yeah, everyone's nodding. Oh, she does. So we're going to have a good day today. One of the key components when it comes to preventing and ending homelessness, of course, is the recognition that no one person, agency, program, department can actually prevent and end homelessness alone. And so the theme of today is actually, it takes all of us. And in many ways, it does. So this is a community issue. We refer to homelessness as a wicked social problem because it is extremely complicated, with the realization that decades and decades and decades we've been moving towards our current reality as it relates to the scope and the depth of homelessness that Canadian communities are experiencing. So we're going to spend the day today really talking about the issues and, most importantly, talking about the opportunities to make improvements and enhancements and to identify the path forward. So how do we do that together? The day in and of itself is really all about all of you in the room. We're going to be providing some keynote speaking addresses to kind of provide some information, provide some fuel for conversation, and then you'll actually have breakout discussion groups, where you will have a facilitator who will actually be leading the conversation. You will also have a note taker who will be there to take care of you. You'll have an opportunity during each of the breakout sessions to actually delve into two separate topics. So we're going to be doing that. So it's a really important opportunity for everyone to have the courage to have their voice heard, but also to acknowledge that in our room we have people from very different life experiences, that you will probably be meeting with people who are not only working in the field, but also have experiences related to housing insecurity and homelessness. And as we listen to each other, to our neighbors, being really, really clear that every voice is important, that we want to remind ourselves that all the things we ever needed to know about life we learned in kindergarten, so we're going to listen to each other. We're going to make sure that people have an opportunity to be heard, and our facilitators will be helping us to do that. We also want to ensure that you're taken care of throughout the day. And so you will see, of course, refreshments, and those of you who love coffee as much as I do, coffee is a very important part of my day, but you'll have refreshments here all day. You'll also be able, at any point during the day, if you need to get up and, take care of yourself and walk around. It's difficult to stay seated all day, so feel free to take care of yourself in that regard. We'll also have washrooms, of course. You will be able to head on out through this banquet area here, and just straight down the hallway you'll see the washrooms, so feel free to take care of yourself in that regard. Those of you who are wondering about the Wi-Fi password, lots of you wondering about that? So the city staff are actually going to be putting the Wi-Fi password on sheets of paper and distributing it. Apparently it's a long password, right? So you'll have it on your table shortly if you don't already have it. Throughout the day, it might also be really helpful if people put their cell phones on Do Not Disturb, just so, if you have to take a phone call, feel free to do that. And enjoy your day. That's the key important piece. When we sort of think about the day, recognizing that the prevention and ending of homelessness is certainly a complicated and a difficult process, but certainly a process that we can indeed accomplish together, we acknowledge the fact that throughout the day we are likely to come up with questions that we're not going to be able to answer in the here and now. And so Laura and Stephanie and the City of Brantford staff have ensured that you have opportunities to actually raise questions On the back wall here, you'll actually see two different poster boards. And if during the day you have questions that we can't answer right now, feel free to park those questions in the back. And what the city has actually promised to do is to take all of those questions that couldn't be responded to today, go back to their offices, find the answers, and then they'll be creating a public resource that will be shared with everybody. Okay, so all questions and all comments are really important. So feel free just to use the sticky note and put it on the poster board in the back so that we can capture those questions and get those answers for you. The other key component I think that becomes really important on a community conversation day, of course, is that we want to have an opportunity for some of our elected officials to actually bring greetings. So the acknowledgement being that our elected officials actually have an opportunity not just to do the difficult work related to identifying and creating policy around the prevention and the ending of homelessness, but also to ensure that any individuals and members of their community have an opportunity to really look at an issue that's impacting all Canadian communities. So this morning I'm going to be introducing some of our politicians, some of the people who represent your area and your interests, and they'll be bringing greetings from their respective duties. So first of all, the mayor of the city of Brantford, Mayor Kevin Davis, was elected as mayor to the city of Brantford in October 2018. He's a passionate community activist committed to improving the quality of lives for the residents of Brantford, and he feels honored to serve. Mayor Davis has an extensive background in public service, using his knowledge and skill set to drive efforts in making our community better. Mayor Davis.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. Well, Cheryl, I was interested to hear that you're from Newfoundland. Tracy, that you're from Newfoundland. But you know what? I've come to identify myself only one way now, and that is I'm a Brantfordian. I'm a very proud Brantfordian, and I'm really proud of my community. And what really makes me exceptionally proud of our community is how we've demonstrated time in, time out, the ability to draw together as a community to deal in a coordinated fashion, working together with the problems that we have before us. And you know, clearly homelessness is an important issue for our city that we have to come together if we're going to solve this problem. It's not going to be any one level of government, not any one group that's got the magic solution, the total answer for this problem. So it's really wonderful you're here today. I have to tell you, I've been to a lot of community sessions. Never have we had so many people passionate attending in one conference. This has got to be at least 100 people, and I think that speaks to how our community feels about this problem. We want to find solutions. And so in that theme of coming together, it's great that we have other politicians, representatives of their government here today, MPP Will Boma, Mayor David Bailey, my fellow councillor Joshua Wall, and we have candidate Mr. McColman. I understand you'll be introducing the other candidates that are here in the federal elections. So last thing I want to say is, you know, this housing problem, it's not a problem, it's a challenge for our community, because the problem seems to suggest maybe we can't overcome it. I see it as a challenge, and I love challenges. That's why I ran for office, to overcome challenges. And so on this one, this has been many years in the making for our community. And you know, I'll take the blame in some ways that you know, past councils, for various reasons, didn't make housing a #1 priority, because there were more important issues at the time. This has now moved up on the agenda, I can assure you, with City Council. We had a priority setting session earlier this year. Entire council attended, and housing and dealing with housing was set as one of our top 5 priorities. And it's the top 5 priorities that really move along. So we're here today. I want to stop speaking, because we're not here to talk. I'm here to listen, so we can work together to find out what's going to work best for our community. But I can tell you this, you've got a mayor and a number of councillors, Councillor Wall being one of them, who are committed to finding a solution for the town and city that we're very proud of. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So next to bring greetings, we have Mayor David Bailey from the County of Brant. Elected as mayor of Brant County in October 2018, his passion extends to many facets of the County of Brant's simply grand community. Mayor Bailey has been actively engaged in civic leadership for over 25 years, including leadership and membership on a wide range of community boards and foundations. Mayor Bailey, please.
Well, thank you for inviting us here today. And on behalf of the County of Brant, I'd like to bring greetings from my council. We do have Councillor John Bell here from Paris. Thank you for coming, John. I think it's going to be very interesting for you and what you're up to in the downtown of Paris. I look around the room and I see the right people here, which is really nice. All the right people from all the right organizations that can make a difference. And thank you for showing support and interest in this topic. This is a topic that we wished we didn't have to talk about, but you know we do have to. And it's a topic that is now being talked about out loud and often, and I think that's good. I do know that Mayor Davis it's on the top of his checklist, and that's good. And you'll always have friends in the county. We have our own problems too, our issues. Kevin doesn't like to call them problems. I'll call them issues if you like. And we have things that make us very sad to have to say out loud sometimes, and we don't understand how it happened or how long it's been going on, but we're glad that enough people in this room have come together to think it's important enough to help Kevin and I make things right again, make things good again, and come up with some solutions. So thank you for your interest. Thank you for coming out, and know that you always have a friend in the county. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Bailey. Up next, we have our representative from the provincial parliament, MPP Will Bouma of Brantford-Brant. Will has elected to the Legislative Assembly of Ontario in 2018, serving as the parliamentary assistant to the Premier. To you, sir.
Thank you, Tracy. It's indeed a very great pleasure to be here and to be able to have this conversation to talk about this issue. It's everyone said that already. It's so multifaceted. No government program, no single government program can do this, and it's a conversation that takes everyone. And I think the solutions that will come out of this will come up from the grassroots and up. And in fact, the theme, it takes all of us, that everyone's voices are important in this process, are key to finding solutions. And as I've learned from Josh Wall, the fact that, you know, every single person that lives in this community needs to feel like they're home when they are here, that they have a responsibility to our community, that they live here, and that we value them for who they are is so key in all of these things too. So I'll keep my remarks short. It is a real pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to see what will come out of this meeting that we can learn from and take definitive action to combat homelessness. Thank you everyone for being here. You're all part of the solution. Have a great day.
Thank you. So next, we have Phil McColman, who was elected to represent the electoral district of Brant in 2008. He's the Member of Parliament for Brantford-Brant and serving as the official opposition critic for the Treasury Board. No small task. So over to you, sir.
Thank you, Tracy. First of all, it's customary during an election period to recognize other candidates who may be in the audience. I haven't walked around to see, but is there anyone here in terms of the federal candidates? There's 8 candidates in the election. Any of them here? If you are, just put your hand up. Okay, that's done. I too want to lend my unconditional support to this initiative that the city has brought you together here to discuss. I have a little bit of experience in one community, and even though I was introduced as the critic or the shadow minister for the Treasury Board, I'm actually, for 2 years, have been shadow minister for Veterans Affairs. And the veterans community in this country is a specific community of people who have many complex issues sometimes coming out of their military service. And one of the initiatives that is undertaken by all governments of all different stripes over the years is to end veterans' homelessness. And so there are many organizations across the country working on this issue, identifying homeless veterans wherever we can find them, and trying to help them, raise them up, and give them a vast improvement in their life by giving them the supports they need. And so when it was mentioned by Tracy right out of the start of this that it is a complex issue, it is a complex issue. I can tell you that, having met some of the veterans and what their issues are, and other people who are homeless. And when you start to understand, as this day will begin to work on for our community, that it takes a community, that it takes everybody to help out. Was involved in one initiative called Housing First, and we put up the physical bricks and mortar, but I would consider the physical bricks and mortar of housing and a roof over your head as to being probably one of the lower priority items of what you have to deal with when you're helping someone come out of homelessness. There are so many issues. And so thank you today, each and every one of you, for taking your time. It's something that is absolutely required, that we work towards a zero homelessness in this community. And so you have my full support for your day. May you have a wonderful day.
Thank you. So, thank you, gentlemen, for your service. It's interesting being a military spouse myself. So often I think that we forget to thank people for their service. And when we do think about it, it's usually things like Remembrance Day or election days or things like that. So thank you for your service. We're going to move along a little bit in terms of helping people set the stage for what's actually happening across Brant. And one of the really interesting pieces is the recognition being that for many of you in the room, this is not a new issue. This is something that you have been working really hard to address for many, many years. And so we want to give the City of Brantford, who's actually the consolidated municipal service manager for the entire area, responsible for housing and homelessness in particular as it relates to our topics today, an opportunity to fill us in a little bit in terms of what is actually happening on the local level. So I'm going to ask Sue Evenden, Anthony Labatt, and also Hannah Inter to come up. They represent the Health and Human Services Commission, and they're going to be giving us an overview of activities locally.
Good morning, everyone. Wow, there are a lot of people and cameras here. Makes me wish I was having a better hair day. It's the humidity. Some of you can relate. And my name's Susan Evenden, and I work for the City of Brantford, as mentioned, in the Health and Human Services Department. And if you will indulge us for a few minutes, we just want to sort of catch everyone up, hopefully to the same place on the page as to where we're at currently. And we're so happy that so many of you have joined us today. And actually, some exciting things have already happened. I had a few conversations before the day started with people with concrete ideas and wanting to share their experience. And that is very much what we want to see happen here, because this is the start of something that we've never done before, which is a City of Brantford and County of Brant plan to reduce and eliminate homelessness. And that will be work that we will be undertaking over the next number of months, and we certainly hope that most, or indeed all of you, will join us as we work through that. And so really, this is about how we collectively work together, and some of our elected officials have already referenced this. As we start to have those conversations, I know that in your groups, it's going to sound like this. The city should really, here's an idea I have, somebody in the city should do this. You may certainly have those ideas, and we're here for that. We're here to hear those ideas. But I also want to really invite and challenge you to take the conversation to, what can I as an individual potentially contribute? Or what if those of us that are out there doing really excellent work were to join forces and do that work collaboratively? Who else should we have around our table that's not here today that can really make a difference on this issue? So as we have those conversations, we fully expect there could be some difficult moments. It can be a very difficult topic. It can be a very personal topic. Please know that if at any point you do become emotional, as we are in any of our sessions, that there is a lovely lounge out front. You can certainly go outside, and we do have people here who can support you. We're also not necessarily going to agree. There are going to be a lot of different viewpoints, and that's okay. We can disagree on what needs to happen. What I can tell you is that in March of 2018, at least 186 neighbors in our community told us they did not have anywhere safe or secure to live that evening. What I can also tell you is that as of 2019, we have a 60% increase in occupancy in our emergency shelters. So I'm hoping what we can all agree on in the room is that that is not where we want to be. And that's really what makes today so important. One of the questions that I typically hear, and we will certainly, if you can't see this too well, I'll walk through it for you, but I'm also going to tell you that on the website that most of you registered through, all of the materials from today, including the tape of the live stream, will be available after the event. So you will certainly be able to see this with more clarity. But a lot of times people ask, well, how much money exactly are we spending right now from a government level? This is just literally what money is coming into the city around homelessness and what it's being spent on. And I will put a disclaimer on this to say this is very high level. We've grouped a lot of things together just to give you this picture that we are in fact receiving investments from all levels of government, federal, provincial, municipal. Again, this is just what we receive into our budget, so this does not account for any transfers that might happen federal, provincial, behind the scenes. So our majority funder for sure is the province of Ontario through the Community Homelessness Prevention Initiative, and you'll see that at nearly $3 million. But I also want to acknowledge the important role of the federal government. We're going to be talking more about reaching home, the federal government's strategy. And in fact, we can thank the federal government for this event today. They are our sponsor for this community conversation, so we're very grateful for that. At a municipal level, there is over $1 million between the city and the county right now that is being invested in our homelessness response. And that is a big deal because in most other communities, that's fully 25% of our homelessness budget, and that is more than most other communities. So Mayor Bailey, Mayor Davis, thank you for your support for this important work. And now what do we spend it on? Biggest spend by far is sheltering. Most of which is emergency or crisis shelter, as well as the services that are provided through our Housing Resource Center, which is outreach, housing search, and crisis response for people who are already homeless. And you'll see that that's 70% of the expenditures. The other approximately 30%, we do provide direct funding to individuals who are facing homelessness for things such as rental arrears or for utility connects or things that they need in order to move to a more sustainable form of housing. So we do provide that by way of prevention as well as our system management and planning. So that is not the ideal balance, if you didn't know that already. Right? You should actually be spending at least half or more on trying to prevent people from becoming homeless in the first place. I see some people nodding, which would be desirable. The problem that we have right now is that the need is so great in terms of people in housing crisis that you can't not respond to that. Just want to also quickly give you a picture, and again, I'll walk through it if the visibility is not there at the back. Just again, to situate this conversation, when we create a plan for ending homelessness, we will probably use a structure something like this. This is what a lot of people think a sort of a complete homelessness response system should look like. The first the first block is outreach and what's called coordinated access, which we are working towards, but we are not there yet, which is anywhere that someone enters in for help who's experiencing homelessness, essentially they would go through the same process, and then you would be offered things that are suitable to the circumstance that you're in. Prevention, so we offer a lot of those services currently through our Access Points Housing Resource Center at 220 Colburn and also at Community Services in Paris. Prevention, again, I mentioned the Brantford Brant Homeless Prevention Assistance. So that's a direct assistance to try and help people remain housed if they are running into financial difficulties with sustaining their housing. Want to pause on emergency shelter for a moment because there are a lot of questions about this coming out of our shelter review, which was completed last year. And I just want to point out that we have 70 beds in our emergency shelter system, of which 60 are adult beds, although Nova Vita, hello Nova Vita back there, the Nova Vita houses both women and children. Rosewood has 30 new 24/7 shelter beds as of this year that are co-ed. So we often get a lot of questions about women who are experiencing homelessness and where they can go. So that was an enhancement to the shelter system. We have specific beds for youth at the Youth Resource Center, and we also have the ability to provide some short-term housing at a city-owned property at 702 Colburn. So that's an increase actually of over the 58 beds that we had, say, at the end of last year. So we now have 70 emergency beds. There is an orange block on the bottom that says rapid rehousing, and there's nothing beside it. So you can't have the conversation about homelessness without having the conversation about affordable housing. And so what rapid rehousing should do is if someone comes into homelessness, if it can't be prevented, then what you try to do is get people into housing as quickly as possible. And so as you probably know, that's difficult right now given our current housing situation. And that is, and I think that candidate McColman referenced zero homelessness, or what they call functional zero, which I think has different definitions. But essentially, what you want to do is you want to have less people becoming homeless than you have moving out of homelessness. So if you can move more people out of homelessness than you have coming in, if again, not everyone will agree on this, but if you acknowledge that probably you're still always as a community going to have some people who may become homeless, you want to make that brief, rare, and non-recurring. And one of the ways you do that is to connect people back into housing as rapidly as possible. And that's a piece in our current system. And again, when you're making conversation at your table, that will be a topic, right? How can we fill in that gap? We know that's a gap. Supportive housing and permanent supportive housing also plays a role on the continuum, because what that provides is housing and then also additional supports should people need them in order to remain successfully housed. So we are very grateful as a community that we were successful in receiving the Homes for Good funding allocation to create up to 90 units of affordable supportive housing in the community. Most are in the community, but we're very excited that as of this spring, we will be opening a new build for 30 units on Marlene Avenue. Then that will be supported housing targeted specifically to people who have experienced chronic or episodic, but most likely chronic homelessness. And it's the first supported housing that is actually directed to reducing homelessness. And so that's very good news. There's a little bit of bad news that comes with it, which is we, right now, as we sit here, could probably fill those 90 units 3 or 4 times over, right? So it's wonderful, clearly not quite enough, but a step in the right direction. And we also do fund 2 facilities which are sort of in the middle ground between emergency shelter and supportive housing, and those are the Penmarvian and Kaori Manor. So with that, I'm going to invite Anthony and Hannah to come up and just dig a little deeper into the federal homelessness strategy. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming out. It's amazing to see such a great crowd and so many people that want to participate in the conversations that we are going to have today. I'm not going to take up a whole lot of your time. I'm just going to take up enough time just to have a conversation about reaching home, which is the National Homelessness Strategy. And as Sue referenced on her previous slides, right now we're receiving approximately $300,000 per year for this program. Now, not everybody gets the Reaching Home funds. You have to apply, and Brant has been lucky enough to be funded by the federal government for the homelessness strategy for quite some time, even before it became Reaching Home. Now, how these funds actually get spent is not determined by the City of Brantford. It's actually determined by a group of volunteers. And this group of volunteers is comprised of different service providers that could be working with the homeless population or similar populations. Could be comprised of folks that have lived experience as well. So it's actually that advisory board that determines what the priorities are and how those funds are actually going to be spent. So ideally, what that board looks like is we have a diverse range of individuals that reflects the diversity of the community. So in the middle of your tables, there is a piece of paper that actually gives some information on that advisory board because we are looking for additional volunteers. So I would like everybody just to sort of take a look at that, and if this speaks to you, you feel like based on your either lived experience or work experience, you may have something to contribute to that group. There's information on how you can apply if you would like to be a volunteer on that board. Now, what I will say is that it is a significant time commitment at times. So for sure, at a minimum, I would say at least 2 to 3 hours per month, really depending on what projects are ongoing. So one of the requirements of Reaching Home, if you do receive Reaching Home funds, is that you have to submit a plan to the federal government that talks about how you're going to reduce chronic homelessness. And so we have to submit that plan in October. Now, part of what needs to be included in that plan is stakeholder feedback. So we have a responsibility to make sure that we are reaching out to the community and having conversations like this, really to make sure that everybody's voice is heard and everybody has a say in what we should be focusing on when it comes to homelessness. So actually, we've been doing consultations. They started early summer, smaller consultations. So these consultations have been geared towards populations that have complex needs as it relates to homelessness, and maybe populations that are actually overrepresented when it comes to homelessness. So in total, we've done 12 different consultations. They've been smaller. They've been at the emergency shelters. They've been all over the community. And part of the feedback that we actually received during these consultations helped inform the conversation we're having today. So we took that feedback that we did receive, and we sort of used it to develop the speaking points and conversation points that we're going to be having these conversations about. So as Sue mentioned, not only do we have to submit a plan to the federal government, but we'll be working on a strategy as well, based on the feedback that we are going to get today, and that will be made public when it's done. I would just like to close out by saying that I really hope today is a day of learning, that we can learn from our fabulous speakers, but also that we can learn from each other. And I really think and feel that this is just the beginning of the conversation, and that this conversation will hopefully continue long after this conference ends today. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Hannah.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Hannah Ittner, and I'm the project manager leading the implementation of HIFIS 4. I will keep this brief because I'll be talking about software, so I'll just keep it short and sweet. All right, so Reaching Home, as mentioned before, is a federal initiative implemented by Employment and Social Development Canada to prevent and reduce homelessness by providing direct support and funding to communities across Canada. So as part of this Reaching Home contract, the City of Brantford is required to implement a coordinated access system by March 31st, 2022. A coordinated access system comprises of many different components, including a centralized database, clear access points of entry, common assessment, standardized protocols, and supportive resources. And this is where HIFIS comes in, the centralized database. So HIFIS stands for the Homelessness Individuals and Families Information System. It's a comprehensive data collection and case management system designed to better understand what is happening in our community and to work collaboratively. It offers a series of online modules and functionalities that supports day-to-day operations. This can include client information and intake, case management, service tracking, customized reporting, and data sharing. And the benefits associated with HIFIS 4 is that it can be completely customizable to the community. So we can really configure it to what would suit our needs best in Brantford Brand. So the City of Brantford initiated the HIFIS 4 project April 2019, and it's required to have this software fully implemented by March 2022. So during this time, the core activities that I will be leading are as follows. So the creation of a HIFIS 4 advisory committee. So this will consist of all the users of HIFIS 4 that we've defined. And the purpose of the advisory committee is to seek peer feedback on software configuration, to collaborate on business processes as related to HIFIS, to ensure that there are consistent processes and approaches as appropriate, and to problem solve collaboratively. So I'm working with service providers to make sure that the software works for their business needs, but also to be able to better support clients to reduce the time as part of like the intake process, and to better support clients in reaching the services that they need. The second component or core outcome that I'm aiming to achieve is, of course, onboarding HIFIS 4 with emergency shelters, housing support services, and the Housing Resource Center. The third is the alignment of business practices where possible, so making sure that all service providers are where it's most suitable, aligning the business practices to make sure that clients have a consistent experience regardless of what service provider they access, and then in turn being able to have service providers better support one another because we're all consistently supporting and providing assessments and prioritization in the same way. And then the fourth component would be the development of legal agreements and consent. So of course, developing data sharing agreements to make sure that privacy is of the utmost importance, and developing consent forms for clients. So while there's numerous positive outcomes associated with HIFIS 4, here are some of the core outcomes that we expect by the end of our project. So the first being an accurate by name list. So a by name list is essentially just an accurate list of the individuals that are experiencing homelessness. So what this means is that a client, as I mentioned before, they don't have to repeat their information every single time they access a service provider. So thereby reducing the amount of time that it takes for intake, and also being able to refer clients to different resources. And then in turn, it helps the city to better articulate the scope of the challenge that we face and be able to identify where the supports are needed. A second positive outcome associated with the project. Oh, do you have a question? Of course. Right. Yeah. Yeah, so as part of the project, we will be hopefully being able to produce more reports to be able to share information, but I think that's a really strong and important point. So for the beginning implementation, we're focusing on being able to roll out with the emergency shelters first, just to make sure that we're able to influence where there is that direct impact. But of course, this is a project that is growing, so I think being able to have conversations about how we can incorporate different agencies, I think that's absolutely important. Asking the people. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So the goal of the project is just to be able to have that centralized point of access to be able to collect that information. But I do think that that's an absolutely strong point, to be able to then be able to reach out to agencies. And of course, this is just the beginning of the project. So the intent is to be able to work collaboratively with the community, of course. So I'd love to discuss this further if that's okay afterwards. Yeah, thank you so much. The second positive outcome associated with the project is the live bed tracking system. So being able to have service providers being able to demonstrate their occupancy rates, to be able to better and more quickly support clients. The third is of course, like I mentioned before, consistent business practices so clients know what to expect when they're accessing these services, and agencies being able to support one another, and then informed evidence-based policymaking. So that means that through the data that we collect, we will be able to contribute to the portrait of homelessness in Canada. So I would say that wraps up my entire spiel. And of course, if you have any questions, like, feel free to contact me at any time. I would have had a presentation that had my contact information, but that's okay. But thank you so much for your time, and I will pass it off to the next person. Thank you.
Okay, people need to grab coffee because they're itty bitty cups. Itty bitty. So help yourself. So as I put up my presentation here, I want to introduce you to one of the wonderful men who has joined my life recently. Those of you who know anything about me, my life is completely surrounded by men all the time, whether I want it to be or not, but it is. And so with the work that we do with Code Consulting, one of the wonderful men that I have the opportunity to work with is my coworker, Dick Passmore. And Dick joined us not quite a year ago, but almost. One of my favorite people. And Dick's going to be spending the day with us primarily so we have an opportunity to actually talk about the issues, to talk about how we can go about in a community, looking at opportunities and solutions. And so he's going to be facilitating some of the breakout groups, and at any point feel free to have a conversation with him. So let's see if I can get my PowerPoint up and running here. Here we go. Thank you. Fun, hey? We gotta love technology. All right, excellent. So as I mentioned before, I'm Tracy, and we've been asked to talk about how we can support individuals and families who may be experiencing complex or multiple co-occurring needs through a housing first approach. And an interesting component for us is that when I started putting this PowerPoint slide together to talk about Housing First, instead of using this title, I actually used the title, How Housing First Changed Our World. And I always sort of think about Housing First not so much as a program model, but as a philosophy. And having worked in human and social services for way too long, over 25 years now, there's the recognition being that many times, historically, with the best of intentions, we oftentimes worked from a social control, a social expectation mode that really was not overly respectful of the individuals and their life experiences and their journey. And so when I think about Housing First and how it actually came online throughout Canada, it was at a really important time in our history around how we did social and human services. So over the last 7 years, I've been attached to a band of merry misfits that we refer to ourselves as Code Consulting. And we're certainly misfits in the sense that we've all worked in the field. We all come from life experiences that in many ways would push us beyond the comfort zone of doing regular social work. We've led communities, we've led agencies. Many of us have life experiences as it relates to compromised mental wellness, housing insecurity, the struggles around trying to have a positive impact on shifting the needle as it relates to an understanding and an awareness of the trauma, but also the opportunity of dealing with homelessness and housing insecurity. Somehow, in some way, we've had an opportunity to work not just right across North America, but we've also most recently been working in Australia and New Zealand as well. And one of the interesting pieces is that wherever we go, the context of the community, the context of the issues oftentimes look very similar, but there's a recognition being that unless we take a local context view of what's actually the reality of housing insecurity and homelessness in Brantford, Brant, then we'll miss an opportunity. So the recognition that one size certainly doesn't fit all, that we need to be flexible and innovative in the solutions that we're looking for. When we sort of look at community approaches that have been used to address housing instability and homelessness in the past, we start at the bottom of the triangle here. For decades, we kind of took the approach of just maintain the status quo, that people will experience housing instability and potentially homelessness, and we're going to continue to provide our services as we've always provided it. And we'll just hope for the best, and people will find their way out. When they're ready, they'll come into our agencies. When they're ready, they'll actually demonstrate that they're, good to go as it relates to returning to housing. And generally, we started to shift from this maintaining the status quo in human and social services to recognizing the fact that basically ignoring the issue and hoping that this did not impact so many of our neighbors, that we started to acknowledge the fact that realistically, not only were we seeing an overall increase in the number of people experiencing homelessness, but very importantly, as we started to try to manage this issue a little bit more, primarily through bureaucratic ways, right? So we're going to make sure that we have the ability within our community to have spaces for people to go to. We want to make sure that people's basic needs are met, and we didn't really have a focus on truly ending people's homelessness. And what we discovered was, even with all of our efforts and all of our investments, that not only the number of people that were experiencing homelessness, but the length of that homelessness and the multiple levels of need and vulnerability continued to rise. And so throughout Canada, we were really struggling with the best of intentions that we had. We were starting to see that more and more neighbors were not just experiencing homelessness, but they were staying stuck in homelessness for a really long period of time. And our efforts to manage the issue really failed. And so suddenly we had an opportunity to say, okay, if we acknowledge the fact that the definition of insanity is to continue doing the exact same thing over and over and over and over again, and we expect a different result, if we're not going to do that anymore, then we have to do something different. And so for communities across the country and across North America, doing something different was actually shifting from this belief that we're just going to manage homelessness to we're actually going to identify how do we go about preventing and ending homelessness one individual and one family at a time. And how do we do that in an innovative way that's respectful of the individuals and of the families that we have the privilege of serving. And so when we think about our road and this evolution of how we deliver services, a large part around the introduction of Housing First as a philosophy, but more importantly as a program, was the result of chaos. That historically we had done lots of things and none of it had really achieved the outcomes and the impacts that we were hoping for. So what we have learned from these past approaches, that ignoring homelessness won't work. Won't work. That we can't arrest our way out of homelessness, that won't work. That we don't have to worry about attracting homelessness to our communities, because even in small rural areas, homelessness already exists. So we don't have to worry about attracting it. We have also learned the hard way that staying in your own lane will not solve homelessness. And that the vast majority of those folks of you who are working in the field right now, oftentimes you recognize that the homelessness sector really is sort of the catch-all sector. So if things aren't going as well as they would like them to go as it relates to poverty, as it relates to access to health care, as it relates to any involvement in criminal justice, when all other systems really can't meet the needs of the people that we have in our community, of our neighbors, oftentimes people will end up experiencing homelessness. And so the recognition being that a homeless serving sector can actually prevent and end homelessness in and of itself is impossible. That we have to look at all sectors of service, whether it's healthcare, whether it's foster care system, whether it's our community partners, the recognition being that the people that we have the privilege of serving actually deserve an opportunity and a collaboration that's dedicated to really focusing in on solutions. And realistically, we recognize the fact that if we look at ending homelessness one individual and one family at a time, ending homelessness is easy. It just has to be tied to some form of housing intervention. Because homelessness really means we're without a home, and therefore the solution has to be tied to providing people with an opportunity for a safe and affordable place that they can call their own. So when we think about what has achieved the outcomes and the impacts that we're looking for, realistically, if we think over the last 25 to 30 years, the one key program model that has indeed represented an improvement and a success rate is this program called Housing First. And in many ways, we actually hate the term Housing First because lots of people say they're doing it and they're often not. Lots of people say they understand it and they often don't. And so when we think about what Housing First is all about, we have to acknowledge the fact that Housing First as a program model is not a silver bullet. It is not going to be the one thing that your community can do that will prevent and end all homelessness for all people forever and ever. But what we have learned is that it has to be one of the important components that really targets a population of people experiencing chronic homelessness and sometimes episodic homelessness who are experiencing multiple co-occurring issues. So it actually targets a key population of people experiencing lengthy periods of homelessness. Not everyone who's experiencing homelessness will need this intensive support. And so we recognize that it's just one part of it. When we sort of think about the benefit of Housing First as a philosophy and as a program, the recognition being that the key issue for everybody who's experiencing homelessness may not actually be substance use, may not actually be mental illness, may not even actually be poverty. But the one key factor that is similar for all people experiencing homelessness is a lack of housing. And so that provides a foundation and a starting point for us to return to feeling like we're reconnected to this community. When we think about one of the key ways that Housing First has changed how we do our work, we start to acknowledge the fact that historically, potentially due to our lack of understanding about homelessness, that we are naturally conditioned to have an emotional response to things that we see, things that we hear, long before we're going to have a logical response. And one of the benefits of this shift in how we look at homelessness and how we look at the solutions to homelessness is to actually identify the fact that if we can focus in on what's actually similar amongst our neighbors who are experiencing housing instability and homelessness, rather than how different they are from their housed neighbors, it provides us with an opportunity to move forward in a respectful way, and one that achieves this level of dignity and this comfort and this safety for people because we're seeing the humanity within an issue like homelessness. So when we sort of think about how are people who are experiencing housing instability and homelessness the same as all other members of our community, it starts to raise the question about what are some of the beliefs or potentially some of the myths that we may have had about homelessness in the past that actually serve to be a detriment to our ability to find solutions. And if you think about in our communities how we oftentimes will hear community members talking about our neighbors who may be experiencing homelessness, we start to recognize the power of words, to the point where in some communities and within some community conversations, you will hear homelessness being described as those people, right? Those homeless people or the homeless people, when in fact they're neighbors who are experiencing housing instability and homelessness. So let's put the humanity back into people's experiences within our community. Incoming call. Pick up the phone, Laura. When we sort of think about what's happening, what we have to acknowledge is that for many, many years, we always acknowledged that there was a really strong connection between housing insecurity and homelessness and economic poverty. We know that. However, thankfully, we think about the millions and millions of Canadians who experience long-term, often intergenerational poverty. We know that a very small percentage of those folks will ever experience the additional trauma of homelessness. And so just because we're experiencing poverty does not mean that we are destined to also experience homelessness. We also know that poor credit history and experiences related to housing evictions are also some of the things that may contribute to people's experience of becoming homeless or getting stuck in homelessness. However, if we look at those two issues related to credit history and history of evictions, and we look at our entire community, we acknowledge the fact the vast majority of people with credit history issues and eviction issues in the past actually are housed. They're not experiencing homelessness. We take it a step further and we look at things like mental wellness and substance use. Oftentimes we'll hear in communities that everyone who's experiencing homelessness is mentally ill and struggling with substance use issues. And we know that that's not true. That in fact, throughout Canada, people who are experiencing and recovering and living with compromised mental wellness, that the vast majority of us are actually housed. And very few of us will ever experience homelessness. The same thing is true for people who have a harmful or an unhealthy relationship with a substance. And so when we stop thinking about people who have the additional trauma of homelessness as being so different from us, but we actually acknowledge the fact that people who are experiencing housing instability and homelessness are just like their housed neighbor, except currently they are without a home. It provides us with an opportunity to move forward and actually solve homelessness one individual and one family at a time. So as a philosophy, Housing First is all about removing the barriers to people being able to access housing. It ties all of our solutions, all of our prevention initiatives, all of our ways of ending homelessness to the key goal of housing. Doesn't mean that that's where it stops. It just means that's where it starts. We also acknowledge that it's not housing only. So in the early days of doing Housing First, we had an awful lot of community leaders who said, we don't want to do this. I mean, why would we pay for people to be housed and then they just continue on doing whatever they're doing? And Housing First has nothing to do with housing only. It's housing providing a foundation that with support and with an opportunity for stability, people can not only be reintegrated back into community and improve their wellness, but also return to employment, do education, whatever it happens to be. The housing is just the foundation to other opportunities. When we think about Housing First as a program, and Sue mentioned earlier that one of the things on the roadmap around our homeless response system was rapid rehousing. So when we think about Housing First as a program, the acknowledgement being that it's a specific intervention that's provided to people who are experiencing normally chronic homelessness, meaning you've experienced homelessness for a very long period of time, to the point where being homeless may feel normal to you. Being in survival mode now feels normal. And being housed may actually cause some concern, some discomfort, some fear, because I know what to do to survive in homelessness. I've figured that out. I'm not really 100% certain what to do if I'm housed. And so there will be an adjustment period for that. But when we're delivering Housing First, it actually requires specialized training. It actually ensures that Housing First agencies have professionalization of their staffing, of their practices, of their policies. It actually changes everything about how you operate as an agency and as a program. And normally, these programs would implement and incorporate peer supports. So the acknowledgement being that if we're coming in and we're providing case management and housing location supports and housing supports, there's still that adjustment component and that reintegration, that working with a peer who's experienced housing instability or homelessness in the past, that peer will bring something to our relationship way beyond the professional support provision of case managers or social workers or anybody else. So that becomes extremely important. So Housing First is certainly not a first come, first served approach. And in many ways, it is the opposite of first come, first serve. And so when we think about how our systems and our services have changed, suddenly with this understanding that as a program model, Housing First would actually seek out those individuals and families that are experiencing long-term homelessness, and not only long-term homelessness, but they have multiple co-occurring challenges that they might be struggling with right now that makes it difficult for them to resolve their own homelessness. And so the recognition being that as we think about Housing First being implemented, Housing First also led to the improvement of other services like, are we doing assessments? Are we really understanding what the individual needs? Do we have an opportunity within our community to know everyone who's experiencing homelessness? And do we have a matching and a referral process that ensures that the right person or family gets to the right program? Definitely not making the assumption that everyone experiencing homelessness will need a Housing First program. So why the support for Housing First? Primarily, we've got a ton of research. So if we fill this banquet room with the research that would actually talk about how Housing First as a program model can meet the needs of individuals experiencing long-term homelessness, we acknowledge the fact that Housing First as a program is a very important component within all of your programs and services related to preventing and ending homelessness. It's also demonstrated impressive social return on investment. So if we think about why some community members are really concerned about housing insecurity and homelessness, part of it is around the economics. And we know based in research that it's much more economically efficient to actually provide people with housing opportunities and support than to pay for the emergency responses and the crisis responses of allowing people to be stuck in homelessness. We also know based in research that it's more effective than transitional housing, and this is more so for single adults than for, let's say, families that might be experiencing violence. It's certainly not as true for our youth population, where transitional housing is indeed achieving the outcomes that we need. It's certainly less costly than permanent supportive housing that is 24/7 on-site supports. It empowers the program participant to actually integrate back into the community as quickly as possible, and it leverages any existing resources. So throughout Canada, we know that every community is struggling with the lack of affordable housing. And so how do we actually leverage any of those finite resources that are available? That becomes extremely important. Most importantly, however, is that Housing First has proven to end homelessness for the individuals that would need that level and that frequency of support. When we think about that social return on investment, we can look to the neighbors in the west of us, and this is just one example of some of the changes that will occur for people when they shift from homelessness and survival to being housed. And generally, when we think about some of the work that we've done in Regina, Saskatchewan with their Small Housing First program, there's the acknowledgement being that in their particular city, they really targeted long-term, chronically homeless individuals with a high depth of need. And what they wanted to do was to provide an opportunity for those individuals to be housed and be supported. And generally in the first year of housing those individuals, they were able, through data sharing agreements, to actually get increased understanding of what was the cost. So they knew how much it was going to cost to house and support people. What they also wanted to know definitively was, in their particular community, how much of the emergency response dollars would they be reducing within their community by actually housing and supporting people. And so I've got two separate slides here that basically demonstrate what's the cost savings. And most of these will happen in the first year of people being housed. But for EMS or ambulance rides, the cost savings in 1 year was $136,000. If we look at policing, they had $268,000 in cost savings. If we look at days in hospital, over $320,000 in the first year. If we look at emergency room visits, $410,000. And if they look at things like detox visits, which in Regina they very closely aligned with that particular health service, they had a decrease in the costs of that particular access to service by $1.1 million, just by housing and supporting people. And so if we take this one step further, and we have people who may be very concerned about making the investment around ending chronic homelessness, the cost-benefit analysis as to why we would end chronic homelessness is really clear. That by housing and supporting people for just this one community, they reduced ambulance rides by 66%. They reduced police calls by 81%. They reduced emergency room visits by 75%. Because from the foundation of home, people can actually take better care of their physical health. They can actually use emergency services only when that is the last resort, because they actually have access to family doctors, they can go to clinics, that type of thing, instead of always relying on emergency services. It also starts to change how we view our community. So when we think about doing housing first, we know that there's a really strong connection between the people that we have the privilege of serving, but we also know that we have this connection with our service providers, not just within the homeless serving system, but within all parts of our community. But now, in order for this to work well, we also need to develop and foster really strong relationships with another member of our community that historically we didn't know very well, and we didn't spend a whole lot of time fostering this relationship, and that was with landlords. Whether that's the housing corporation as a landlord, whether that's a private market rental, all of the opportunities, if we recognize that the only solution to homelessness is housing, then obviously those individuals and corporations and agencies that have housing have to be an active partner in the work that we do. So when we sort of think about housing first agencies, there's a number of things. They believe in low barrier services, so trying to reduce the barriers or the obstacles of people accessing supports. They want to ensure that they're focusing in on rapid access to housing with supports without preconditions. And all that really means is, if I'm an individual, you're not expecting me to have all things fixed and healed, all parts of my life, prior to rewarding me with housing. That housing is actually viewed as a basic human right. And that if we see housing as a foundation for improved wellness and stability and community integration, then the housing comes first. It also acknowledges that not all people's experience of homelessness will be the same. and that how we deliver services will really have to match the needs of the individual or the needs of the household. So 5 core principles. No housing readiness requirements. So historically, housing readiness, and having worked in the field for 25 years, when people came to our door, if we were delivering social services and they were currently experiencing homelessness, our belief historically would have been, I want you to change who you are, what you're doing, who you're hanging out with, what you're smoking, what you're drinking, what you're doing on a daily basis. And when you do all that, and you're really nice, and you come in for your appointment on time, and you have all your information and all your identification and all your documents, when you do all of that, like get everything figured out, when you have all that done, then and only then will we reward you with housing. Right? And so now we have a totally different view. We have an understanding of the fact that everyone is housing ready. People may not be document ready to move into housing, but that's a totally different approach. All people are ready to have a safe, appropriate place where they actually have control over who comes in and who goes out. But as a social service system, we realized that we as a system weren't ready to provide them with the level and the intensity and the frequency of support that they needed, because we just didn't know any better. Yeah? Totally agree. We do. You bet. So historically, we would have gotten so caught up in our checklists, all of our documents, it was all a big transaction, right? Do you have this? Do you have that? Do you have that? And if you do, and if we view you to be a good fit, then come on in. And so no housing readiness requirements completely changed how we sort of viewed our role in the lives of the people that we had the privilege of journeying with them back to a state of stability. We also acknowledge that client choice and self-determination is important. So for years, we would have thought we'd done a great job by placing people into housing. And this belief that people should be really thankful that they have a place to be. However, let's think about humanity. That if I have the ability to choose option A or option B, even if option A or option B is not great, but I have the ability to choose, and I have the ability to identify not just where I'm going to live, but what types of supports can I receive, then my ownership of that process is completely different. It also focuses in on recovery orientation. And sometimes when we think recovery, we think substance use, we think physical health, we think mental wellness. But we've also learned the hard way that recovery also incorporates recovery from homelessness. So we understand the fact that as humans, we adapt to whatever our environment is. And so if I'm sort of living in survival mode for a really long time, that starts to feel normal, even though it might never be what I want to be and what I want to do, but it feels normal. So I've figured out how to be and to survive homelessness. And so returning to a housed state can be challenging. Sorry. You bet. So the statement over here was that recovery is so embedded in a trust issue, right? I need to trust that who you are and what you say you're going to do, you're actually going to do it. And for so many people who experienced long periods of homelessness, everything about who we were as a human or social service worker were things that completely scared them and freaked them out, and we had such expectations of what they should do that we were no longer seeing them. And so trust becomes extremely important. Yeah. You bet. You bet. You bet. So part of it being that trust, developing trust, so the people that we have the privilege of working with, need time to trust that we're actually going to do what we say we're going to do. And for us, as people who are engaged in this process, we also need to kind of own our own stuff, right? We have to be aware of the fact that people might be living a different life than we're living. And it might look really different than what we're accustomed to. And it doesn't mean that we're accepting all decisions and all behaviors, but it does mean that I'm respecting you as another human and your life looks different. And my job and my work is to help you feel and be connected and to increase your wellness and increase your stability. It's also all about social and community integration. And in the early days of delivering Housing First as a program, we totally missed this. Totally. So we forgot the fact that as humans, we are social beings. And in order for me to move from homelessness and survival back to community, I need to feel connected to that community. I need to know that there's neighbors who are next door to me and are not just going to be complaining if there's noise complaints, but they're also going to be there if I need something, and I want to be there for them. So this connection to community becomes extremely important. And so an awful lot of the work that will be done within a Housing First program is helping that reintegration. It also has to be delivered by trained team members. So when we talk about the case management, things are very organized. What we do is very deliberate, and it's embedded within an opportunity to promote awareness and to do coaching on a regular basis, with the acknowledgement being that as people transition from homelessness and survival to being stably housed, that there's some key strategies, but there's also some really important stages around how people will progress from this survival mode back to a housing stability mode. So if we think about it, when people are initially housed in our community, remember, if I'm chronically homeless and I've experienced homelessness for a really long time, I've figured out how to survive that. So now being housed will feel abnormal. And so the initial housing stability, there may be lots of chaos for me because I don't really know 100% what to expect. And so part of the job of that Housing First program team is to actually help in the adjustment phase. So when we sort of think about the stages, the first stage is always around adjustment, how to cope with the new reality. How can you actually have friends over? Do you understand what it means to be a responsible tenant? Let's think about this, because this may not be something that you've done for a little while if you've experienced long periods of homelessness. And it's all about the coaching, right? Opportunities to learn new skills, get connected to community resources, to really ensure that you're experiencing that stability before resources and supports go away. Historically, we probably would have defined success related to housing stability very differently. We would have identified it as, people who move from homelessness to being housed, now their life is perfect. Well, guess what? None of our lives are perfect. So housing stability, defined, actually means that the individual or the family is not experiencing tenancy or lease issues. They know what to do when it comes to addressing issues related to the landlord. They know how to deal with issues with neighbors. Their rent is paid on time and in full. Any other housing bills, they're taking care of that. And their units maintained in a good condition. That is housing stability. And just like all of us, life will still potentially be very imperfect, but I'm not experiencing the additional trauma of homelessness. So when we think about this housing stabilization, when you think about the work that goes into it, there's nothing overly complicated about it, even though it's very deliberate and very strategic and it's founded in evidence, but it's all about being a part of someone's journey back to this stability where we're providing guidance and support, we're doing mentoring and coaching, and we're connecting people to other resources in the community. Because even this particular program can't be all things to all people. When we sort of think about how we go about doing this particular type of work, there's the recognition being that how we deliver the service oftentimes will look really different. than it would have looked 15, 20 years ago. And so Housing First service delivery will really focus in on trauma-informed care. So how are we delivering services with this understanding that as humans, we've all experienced some form of trauma, and that trauma may have actually created responses and reactions? How do we ensure that we're not re-traumatizing people? Are we ensuring that it's strength-based and person-centered, that we're using harm reduction in a way to ensure that people, as they adjust to a new reality, are able to stay safe? And do we understand this view, this psychology of how survival, and part of that survival being, I know how to exist in homelessness, that the psychology of that might actually mean that in the wee hours of the night when it's really dark and it's really quiet and I don't really know what's happening inside my room and this feels really unnatural to me, that my desire to go back to what I know is a normal, natural process of a recovery from chronic homelessness. And so the realization that recovery from homelessness for some people may actually mean that they'll return to homelessness for a brief period of time, because as humans, we avoid being uncomfortable. So if being housed feels uncomfortable, we have a tendency to go back to our comfort zone. Doesn't mean that it's a healthy place to be, it just means I know what to expect there. So how do we help people adjust to that new reality? So in terms of our service orientation, we see our job as really to help people get housed and to help them stay housed. And the staying housed is usually even more challenging for the participants, but also for the workers. That we connect people to community resources, that we're not here to heal and fix people because, hey, none of us are perfect as humans. And so when we think about a starting point, the housing becomes the foundation for all things that are possible. That we believe in hope. That even though people may have learned to survive within a homeless state, doesn't mean that your life can't look different if that's what you want it to be. And when we think about using assessments, we want to use them in a safe way that's designed really to identify their strengths, but also it's more around helping us as social service providers figure out what can we do next to help this person feel connected and embedded back into the community. We acknowledge the fact that for many of the people that we're working with who may be struggling when it comes to mental wellness or substance use or physical health, that challenging what we're seeing is a part of what we do and how we respect people. That we want them to have opportunities to decide what they want their life to look like, and we want to get them connected to those services and to those supports that can help them do that. And that housing stability is my primary role. So if I'm a housing-based case manager, my role may not be I'm your mental health worker or I'm an addictions worker. My job is to help you get housed and stay housed. And through that housing, you have an opportunity to make enhancements and be well. And that everything we do is guided in evidence. So when we think about Housing First and why, as a program model, it works, it's proven to be trauma-informed. So we know that by housing people, if we do nothing but house people who have physical health ailments and compromised mental wellness, being housed in a safe, appropriate place will actually improve their wellness in and of itself. And it doesn't mean that that's where the wellness promotion stops. It means that's where it starts. So once people's symptoms around their health has improved by just being housed, now there's an opportunity to further enhance that wellness. It's also tied to a harm reduction approach. So we acknowledge the fact that by housing people and supporting them, that we can actually assist them in reducing any behavior that might actually be causing them harm. Whether that's substance use, whether that's not taking care of their physical health ailments, whether that's being involved in risky behaviors, but that through housing and through support, different decisions can be made. And it's all based on their choice. So when we sort of think about the importance of choice, this is really tied to human dignity and something that all of us see as being so important. But there's the acknowledgement being that, especially within our country, and having spent 2 days in Reno, Nevada last week, I can tell you that I'm really glad to be a Canadian, where for most communities we acknowledge that housing is indeed a basic human right, and that without housing, our ability to be successful and to be connected and to be an active member of our community is much less. So we want to really identify that housing is a right, not a reward for good behavior, not a reward for being nice. It's a basic human right. And we also know through all of the research that through housing and supports, we're going to see reduced substance use, we're going to see better health outcomes, we're going to see improved mental wellness, better employment outcomes, and fewer interactions with emergency services. It's also all about being trauma-informed. So when we think about some of the statistics related to homelessness, and we acknowledge the fact that if we look at some of the most recent research, if we examine women's homelessness, acknowledging that women and men and young people and transgendered people will experience homelessness in very different ways. But if we look at some of the recent statistics and we look at some of the gender equality statistics that are coming out there, the recognition that almost 90% of all women who experience chronic homelessness are actually homeless because of exposure to violence and trauma. And so living in a world that not only sees housing as a basic human right, but also an understanding that we don't want people to be living with violence and trauma as part of their everyday life. So solving this issue around homelessness becomes really important. In terms of the program, so much work is placed on safety planning, not just for women, but for all people, as they move from homelessness to being housed. And it's also around this concept of homelessness proofing. Because Housing First is not, we are successful when we move X number of people from being homeless to being housed. The success is actually how many people move from homelessness and survival to being housed and reconnected with relationships and community and employment and education and wellness programs, and they're still housed like a year, 2 years, 6 years later. That's the goal of Housing First. So although Housing First is not the only solution, it certainly is one of the components that is present in communities that are getting the outcomes and the impacts that they're looking for related to preventing homelessness and ending homelessness. That it will indeed provide a momentum within your community to actually improve our service delivery, improve our understanding of people who are currently experiencing housing instability and homelessness, and provide us with an opportunity to respectfully be a part of that journey back to stability and wellness and community. And that's it. So, are you ready for a break? Yes? Let's grab some coffee. We have about 10-15 minutes for a break. And then I'm going to ask you to reconvene, because after your break, we're actually going to have our first breakout session. Just a reminder, if at any point during the small group discussion questions come up that can't be answered today, to make the most of the poster boards in the back and use your sticky notes and put questions there, and then the City of Brantford staff will make sure that they get responses back in a public document that they'll be preparing. So the 4 topics. We have, number 1, meeting the complex needs of our unsheltered neighbors. And Anthony is the facilitator. So Anthony's down here on your left, my right. He's going to be facilitating that, and he has a note taker. We have Exploring Youth Homelessness, and that's Brad, right here. Identifying Future Priorities with one of my work husbands, Mr. Dick Passmore, who I should have pointed out to you before, but there he is in the back. And we also have Exploring Housing Needs in the LGBTQ2S plus community. All the way down here to my left, which is your right, and Joanne is facilitating. So the flow of the small group discussions, you'll have about 20-25 minutes to actually go through a structured conversation that the facilitators will take care of. Try your best to balance out the discussion topics, and then we'll let you know when your time is up, and then you'll get an opportunity to move to a different topic. Anything else, Laura? Yeah.
Just please bring your pens with you. We've given out all the pens, so please, if you've got pens on your table, take them over. Thank you.
All right, let's chat. Select a topic and go have a seat.
Go talk to Jason, we've been given direction otherwise. Go talk to Jason.
Okay. And my guess is it's probably higher. Or get one section recorded. We just have a way of finding places to be without just like getting on somebody's radio. So
So feeling safe to self-identify.
I think not having all the shelters trying to.
First, we have the privilege of hearing from Cheryl Forchak. Cheryl's actually a resident of Brantford, which I didn't know that. And she's the Burrell and Richard Ivy Research Chair in Aging, Mental Health, Rehabilitation, and Recovery at St. Joseph's. She's also a distinguished university professor at the School of Nursing, Western University, a scientist, an assistant director at the Lawson Health Research Institute, and she's published on many, many topics, including transitional discharge, technology and mental health care, poverty, housing, and homelessness. So welcome to Cheryl, and she's going to talk about homelessness prevention.
So it is great. I do a lot of research in relation to homelessness and talk about it in different places, but usually the only time I get to talk about it in Brantford is with friends and family. So glad to have the opportunity to do this here. And what I'm going to talk about today is, we heard earlier from Tracy about how homelessness is a wicked problem, and I agree it is because of the number of sectors that are involved. People often have difficulty trying to figure out what to do about homelessness. So I'm going to give you a bit of a model that we've developed over the years. And then, oh no, can you hear me now? Okay, I'll try to keep it like an ice cream cone. So what I said is I'm going to be talking a bit about a model to understand homelessness, and I'm hoping that that will also help direct you as to the kinds of things that you can do for interventions. You heard from the introduction that my background is that I am a researcher, I am an academic, but I went that road because I'm also a practitioner. I worked as a registered nurse and as an advanced practice nurse for many years. And I got very tired of solving some problems person by person that really needed to be solved system by system. And I think any of you in practice have had the experience of having to find the workarounds to make the system work. And sometimes as an academic and a researcher, you get the opportunity, instead of having to go to all the workarounds, try to fix that system to make it work better. So that's really the main focus that I've had, is working on developing and testing various interventions and different ways of offering different kinds of services. I came to looking at homelessness through basically, I was talking earlier to Dick, it was kind of like the universe was telling me I needed to move to this area. I had one project I was working on with one of our very effective models for discharge from psychiatric services, and we were involving 6 hospitals throughout Ontario in this project. And I found that we were seeing people after discharge in homeless shelters. Now that's kind of weird, because when I worked at the old Hamilton Psych for a number of years, if somebody was discharged homeless, it was the same form that we would fill out as a patient assault. And I remember the time when we had 2 in 1 year, and we were very upset by it. So what the heck was happening? And when I would talk to the people in these 6 different places across the province, like, why are these people being discharged homeless? It was the issue, or why am I finding them in homeless shelters after discharge? The reason was, well, they don't have housing skills, or they don't have I said, well, how did that happen in 6 places across the province practically overnight? That makes no sense. So I'm thinking about this, thinking this is weird. Then in London, because I do participatory action research, and I'll get to that in a minute, the same month as I'm querying this, I had people come to me from one of the anti-poverty organizations talking about the number of women, particularly with mental illness, that were accessing the service, that were losing their housing. Now keep in mind, this is a long time ago. This is over 20 years ago. Then I had, the same month, from the Men's Mission, someone else talking about all the men coming. And if I wasn't getting the message yet, I ended up with a situation with my oldest, who's now in his late 30s, but at the time was in grade 9 at BCI here. And my son was very interested in art. In fact, he's a musician now. And one of his friends was also very interested in art, and so would often be over at my house, and they'd be coming up with elaborate artwork together. That would be how they'd spend the evening. That young boy's dad committed suicide. His mother, who had schizophrenia, had a psychotic break, and at 15, he ended up on the streets. Actually, he ended up most nights in my basement for almost 2 years until he got things sorted out. He's actually doing very well now. Went back, completed high school, got into a professional career. At the same time that was happening, though, the mayor at that time actually had a thing in the paper saying we have no homeless people in Brantford. My son, who was in grade 9, actually, I got a call from the school afterwards because he played hooky that day to meet the mayor, coming out at lunch to go around and introduce him to 5 homeless people. And did a lot of volunteer work in that area. So I had all these things happening at once, thinking, maybe I should be looking at the homeless issue and find out what's going on. So, hold on a second. So, although I'm standing here alone, I do no work alone. Probably the people I work with would fill another room this size, because I work with multiple community agencies. Most of the community agencies I work with, I've actually been in partnership. This is actually our 20th anniversary, because we started our partnership 20 years ago in 1999 to start looking at this issue. So we have 20 years of projects and activities related to this. I also have a lot of co-investigators from other universities that work with me, as well as the community agencies. I have staff, and all of our projects involve people with a lived experience. We've had many, many people experiencing homelessness on all of our subcommittees, including sharing co-authorship of the papers. The book I did on housing, homelessness, and mental health, there's a person with a lived experience as a co-author on almost every chapter. In that book, there's a person who's a frontline worker on almost every chapter. I'm just currently working on a book looking at building on the previous one, Poverty and Social Inclusion, that should be coming out from Canadian Scholars Press next year. So one of the things in thinking about homelessness is to think about home. If I had more time, I often use this part of the discussion for some brainstorming on what does a home mean to you, but I want to get into some of the examples. But take a moment and think about this. I'll tell you some of the things I commonly hear, and then you can tell me if I'm missing anything. So take a moment and think, what does having a home mean to you in your life? The things that I often hear, safety is very much one. Having your belongings, a safe place, the people in your environment, the memories, the grandmother's dishes, the wedding gifts, the photo albums. What am I missing? Other things? Yes. Home is where you want to be, absolutely. Pets, people, anything else I'm forgetting or that you're thinking of? Yes. Warm and dry, yes. Comfortable, yeah. How many people, when they close that door or when they enter their home, it's like you exhale. You can relax. So then when you think of that, think about then what losing a home means. And just building on what Tracy said about trauma, and because I have people with a lived experience on our committees, they told us very early on, do nothing in this area without considering the trauma issue. And this was before trauma-informed care was part of the mainstream discussion. Even if you have not experienced violence in your life prior, think of the trauma of losing your home. If that includes losing all your clothes, all your dishes, the photo album, think of all the things, your furniture, that are lost with losing a home. People talk about the opposite of homeless is housed. The opposite of homeless is homed. There's a difference between being homed and being housed. And Tracy, again, alluded to this. You first are housed, and there's often a transition period between being housed and being homed. How long that takes often relates to how long you were homeless. But it's very important that to recognize that difference. So one of the things I found in looking at this issue initially, it's very true that most people with mental illness do not experience homelessness. Probably in Brantford today, we probably have 20,000 people with mental illness. And we heard that there's less than 200 who are homeless. So obviously, the majority of people with mental illness are not going to be homeless. But when you look at the homeless population, people with mental health challenges and addiction challenges are consistently overrepresented. So some things to think about, and anyone who knows me knows where I'll land on this. So why does this happen? Is it something about mental illness that predisposes to homelessness? And that certainly was some of the early discussion when I started working in this field. Is there something about homelessness that predisposes to mental illness? There's a grain of truth there. For example, working in London, the city a number of years ago, before we did our study on looking at best practices for homeless youth, they had done some work looking at people coming from outside London, particularly some of the rural areas, and how fast to get street entrenched. And they found that the youth that had no prior history of any kind of illicit substance use were into IV drug use in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. So even if you didn't have a problem before, you might very well end up with one. But the third thing I think is our most important one to consider, and I hope to give you some evidence for this as we go through, which is to look at, is there something about our societal response to both mental illness as well as our societal response to homelessness that in some ways has created a perfect storm. So, okay, this is a wicked problem. How can we possibly understand homelessness? Has everyone heard of the game of musical chairs? You all know how that goes? People walk around chairs. There's more people than chairs. Music stops. You got to grab a chair. I want you to think of this as an analogy for the homeless problem, and think about, when I talk about the solutions, how this fits in. I want you to think about the chairs representing affordable housing. By affordable, I mean the housing that the people at the lowest socioeconomic group within a given community need to access. That's the chairs in the game. The people circling are the people who need to get the chairs. So those are the people with the least amount of money within the community. If there's more people circling than chairs, you're going to have homeless, right? I want you to think about the music in the game. People don't lose the chairs while they're still sitting. It's when they get up, walk around, and then the music stops. Music very much is a transition, right? So we'll talk about transitions more in a minute, but think about the various transitions that can put a person at risk of homelessness. Well, certainly an eviction, but it could be a job loss. It could be a change in family circumstances. It could be being diagnosed with a mental illness. Children leaving the home, and then your level of support changes. There can be many different transitions, differences of identity. So what's happened with the chairs? Because as I say, I can remember a time when homelessness was not a problem. That's how old I am, right? Some of you younger folk may think we've always had homelessness. We have not. And I say it, especially when I tell people in the healthcare system, they're shocked to hear that it was the same form, as I told you already, as a patient assault, and that 2 times a year was a cause for concern. We did not always have this problem. So what we've seen in Canada is a series of downloading. Housing used to be at the federal level, okay? And so that you know, we're actually the only industrialized nation in the world that does not have housing at the federal level. So what happened pre-1990s is that it was at the federal level and was downloaded to the provincial level. The provinces did not want this. And so what happened is they kind of pulled back a bit and for a period of time refused, in many cases, to invest in public housing. Now you can see it's a financial thing. In your budget, in most people's budgets, housing's the most expensive thing. So you could see why it might be considered a good idea to balance your books by downloading your most expensive cost. But this was a huge issue, and as I say, we are the only country in the world to do this. So it went down to the province until 1995 in Ontario, and so Ontario saw a really bad idea and thought, how can we make this worse? And so how they made that worse in the famous omnibus bill is it was then downloaded to the municipal level with the options that municipalities could even opt out. Okay? So when we had Canada Mortgage and Housing responsible so if you look at a building in Brantford, you could see something that used to be Canada Housing, then was Ontario Housing, then it's Brantford Housing, and then the same kind of thing mirrored all over. It's the same building. So in some years prior to this, federally, we had as many as 100,000 new units built in a single year. I noticed the 10-year plan for Coming Home talks about 100,000 within 10 years. We had some years where we had that in 1 year. After that, in that between period, it was as low as 1,000 units across the entire country. When we downloaded to the municipal level in Ontario, more than half the homeless population in the entire country are in Ontario. So, and again, I want to emphasize, Canada is the only industrialized nation with no national housing. Well, we now have a housing policy with the new statement, but it's not managed at the national level. And in Ontario, it's at the municipal level, which is why the provincial and federal representatives left, and our municipal people are still here. They were trying to do a symbolic gesture of what's happened to housing in the province. Okay, and the comment about housing being a right, this is actually a United Nations proclamation which Canada has signed on to. It should be an embarrassment to every person in this country that the UN has now come to investigate us twice for our poor housing policy. So keep this in mind when we blame the person who's living along the Grand River for being homeless. Okay? That this, and I'm going to use gendered language here deliberately, this is a man-made problem. This is what's happened to the chairs in the game. So what about the people circling the chairs? So for people, and again, when I'm thinking of people who have challenges with mental illness, including addiction. I worked initially in my career in the addiction field. I consider that to be an example of a mental illness. So people may be on, they may have Ontario Works, they may have Ontario Disability, they less likely WSIB or CPP because those require work. They may have employment issues. This is Game of Musical Chairs Turns Ugly. So what happened here? At the same time the housing was being downloaded, general welfare payments, which became Ontario Works, were reduced by 25% across the province. And were not increased for over a decade after, and then increased in 1% to 2% increments. I would say that's a Game of Musical Chairs gone very ugly. What happened to mental health care while this was going on? Well, we talk about deinstitutionalization, which has been evolving worldwide for decades. Is it deinstitutionalization or dehospitalization? In Ontario, we had a period of 20 provincial planning documents in 20 years. Just to give you an idea of the numbers, back in 1960 we had almost 20,000 psychiatric beds. By 82 that was down to 4,500. It's now well below 2,000 in the entire province. And then we had, again, 13 years actually before there was an increase in community housing during the same period that happened. This is mirrored across the country and the world. So when you look at how these things fit together, the question should not be why are people with mental illness overrepresented in the homeless population. The question is actually how could you possibly expect any other outcome? And we also have to think of what was provided. And I'm not saying the solution is to hospitalize people. I think the solution is to provide the appropriate housing in the community. The reason we could have deinstitutionalization is with newer treatments, it was no longer necessary to keep someone in hospital for treatment. But that also provided the roof over their head, the food. And if there's not that provided in the community, then what good was the hospitalization? The other issue, heart disease, just another excuse for lazy people not to work. Imagine if we treated everyone like we treat people who have mental illness. And I use this slide as an example to think of the issue of stigma and discrimination. And certainly the homeless will tell you they experience stigma and discrimination, but certainly people who've been diagnosed with mental illness, including substance use, this is statistically and worldwide the most stigmatized group in society. Is the person that an employer is least likely to want to hire, the person a landlord is going to least likely want to rent to, and the person that a parent is least likely going to want their daughter to marry, right? So when you don't have the public housing and you're relying on market housing, this is really going to come to play in terms of being able to access market housing. It's also going to come to play in terms of people's ability to procure employment. Mental illness comes at any socioeconomic bracket, doesn't matter. But there's what's called the slide into poverty, because no matter where you start, once the diagnosis occurs, your socioeconomic class tends to go down. So again, it adds to the people circling the chairs. So what can be done about it? I think we have to think of it as a systems issue and acknowledge we have a systems failure other than personal issues. And it doesn't mean that we're immobilized, but I think it requires a certain amount of empathy for people who are caught in the situation. With the people with lived experience, sitting around our planning table said over and over again, one of the most hurtful things is knowing that policy context of what happened, and then to be told they're homeless because they didn't know how to budget properly, right? That it's very disrespectful. It does not acknowledge the fact that they're trying to budget an impossible amount of money for the housing that is available. Sometimes you can't do a lot about it, but let's at least acknowledge that the problem is at the systems level, and that we're going to be dealing. We can still act locally, but we have to acknowledge this, that it's not about the individual. And I'm going to give you some more examples to prove that further. But also, because when you think of the chairs, the people, etc., the transitions, what we're talking about is things that cross sectors. No one sector alone can solve the problem. It has to involve collaboration, and that's why I'm very excited by who we have in the audience today, because this is what's needed. It has to involve collaboration. We have to advocate for strategies that increase the chairs or reduce the circling people, and we have to pay attention to the music. So how do we do this? So increasing the chairs, and because my research program because my research chair, my positions are in London, I've worked a lot with the City of London, but many of our strategies we've then taken out to other communities, and I can give examples. So one of the things, and you'll see huge differences from community to community, how much do they actually invest in public housing? Especially given that public housing is now at that municipal level. The other thing that we've done in a number of projects, and I'm going to be going fairly quickly through because we've had so many, as you can imagine, 20 years have had more than one project, is the use of rent subsidies. One of the things that London's been very creative with is if you look at the fact that if you're paying for an emergency shelter for a month for one person, it's in the ballpark of $1,500. which is a big problem when that's your main reliance as a strategy to address homelessness, because it doesn't get anybody homed in and of itself. But if you look at that as an envelope for providing service and potential subsidies, you can actually come up with some better ways to spend $1,500 to get someone out of homelessness. And so with our Homeless Veteran Project, and this was not just this project, we did it through a number of phases, but we had demonstration projects in London, Toronto, Calgary, and Victoria. And with this, we used rent subsidies to help people get the appropriate, the neighborhood of choice, the appropriate housing, far cheaper than the $1,500 a month. With youth, we found there were some different issues. They're more likely to be on Ontario Works than ODSP, even though in our sample that we had 186 youth, 100% had some either a mental illness or a substance use issue, which is a mental illness. When we talked to them about the issue, one of their big issues was getting out of the downtown core. And because of some of the rules on OW, what to do about that. OW was sitting at the table, and the idea of getting a gift from a charitable organization so it would not be clawed back was an interesting solution to do that. The Sisters of St. Joseph agreed to do that. The youth said, just make it $50. $50 is enough to get them out of the downtown core. Almost all the youth that did that did not need it for more than 12 months. We had a few that went up to 18 months. That's $600, for heaven's sake. That's nothing. In that study, we ended up with over 80% of them got housed, and as I said, of 187 youth. The reason they only wanted $50 is that they knew once they got employment, they could make up $50. The veterans, it was often $200. They would never be able to make up $200. Another thing to look at is how do we decrease the people circling? One of the things is around prevention, and a lot of our prevention strategies are hooked in to those transition periods. Done a lot of work around preventing discharge from psychiatric units. We've been using what we did for that project. I'm going to come in a little bit more detail and tell you more about that one, so hold on. Evidence-based approaches such as housing first, harm reduction, we heard a bit about that. We use that as well in our Veterans Project. The other thing that has not been talked much about today is because of the issue of employment is also a big issue that's holding people back and having people circling. And we've had very good luck with social enterprises so that people can have a job, get comfortable with that job. YOU in London, Youth Opportunities Unlimited is another example. We've actually had some of our best luck with addressing some of those poverty issues through through social enterprises. So is it really a systems problem, or do you think it's about people who cannot manage a home, or maybe it's about people not wanting to be homeless? So some of the evidence here, I'll just tell you briefly about our project, Preventing Discharge to No Fixed Address. When we started this work, there was almost nothing in the academic literature. I only found 3 papers that claimed it was a myth, that people do not go from hospital into homelessness. I found very few shelter workers who would substantiate that claim. We did some baseline data in London looking at hospital data, the advantage of also being in hospital and having housing partners there to look at how often did it show up that the discharge sheet said either no fixed address or the address of a shelter, and then also went to the the shelters and how many times did it show up that the question, where were you the night before, was a psychiatric ward. We found it happened about 200 times a year in London back in 2002. I told you I've been doing this a long time. We then decided to have a pilot intervention to try to figure out what to do about it. This is the Reader's Digest version, with the picture a year for each of these steps, even figuring it out. We looked at all the different issues and we thought maybe if what we could do is get faster access to first and last month's rent and faster access to finding housing, we could make a difference. Our original pilot I had at both of our hospital sites in London, and we only included people with no prior history of homelessness. People who were on stable income, either OW or ODSP, and a planned discharge. Now, who would not say that's the easiest of the easy? No prior history of homelessness, stable income, a planned discharge. Wouldn't you love to work with that group? So I thought, we'll just make it easy, we'll make it simple. There are people who just lost their housing now, this admission, never lost it before. And we'll just see if this will work. We'll follow them for 6 months after, and then we'll see what it would take we'll only do it for 20 people, either intervention, doing this, or control, treatment as usual, and then we'll see if we can roll it up higher. I had to stop the study after 14 people and call the university due to ethical issue. It was like studying syphilis and penicillin. Because what happened, even though these people had no prior history of homelessness, et cetera, the first seven, or the seven, not the first seven, the seven that got the intervention, they were fine. Interestingly, because they were such a well-to-do group, 4 of the 7 actually got back to work. The 7 that got usual care, we were all shocked. 6 out of 7, 6 months later, were still homeless. One person was a success in that she was not homeless, but she was recruited into the sex trade on the way into the homeless shelter. Never been in the sex trade before, and 6 months later was still in the sex trade. So although statistically our outcome was housed, we counted that as a success, I don't think anyone would say that's a success. So now I'm in a quandary. How bad is usual care when even that group cannot get out of homelessness in 6 months? By the way, the time for the intervention to prevent that was an average of just under 45 minutes, because that was such an easy group. We know that, and you know from the literature, if someone's homeless 6 months, they're probably homeless 2 years. So what good was the admission, right? What good was that admission? So we've done more work on that. We've brought it into usual care. We've got what we call version 2, which we're bringing in more community partners. Basically, the intervention is we take all our community services and bring them in hospital. So Ontario Works is on site. So that our Housing Finder, our Housing First programs are on site. Our local, we have another program where you can deal with rents and arrears, all that, those sorts of things. They're on site in the hospital. They can be accessed on hospital, it can be by referral, or they have an office where it can be a drop-in, you don't need a referral. Because if you're in hospital, it's kind of hard to arrange for that stuff, right? We've just recently also now taken this to the medical wards. So I'm going to zip through there, just give you some data on that. So I gave examples of different transitions. The participatory action thing, is very important. The one size fits all. And a lot of our work has been looking at how do we have specific models for specific subgroups. I'm going to go very quickly in the interest of time. Our study with youth, we looked at what do they say they want. We talked about housing first, treatment first, both, or something else. We found that the difference with youth is they often avoided the shelters, but one youth would get a home, like a bachelor apartment or a one-bedroom apartment, and 20 kids would move in. Then they would be evicted within 3 months, and then the cycle would start over. So if you're using the HIFIS data and the shelter-owned data, it's going to often systematically lose these youth, or it looks like they've got short periods of homelessness where in fact it's long because of these tenancy issues. What we found is the youth wanted to work on one goal at a time, but move quickly between goals. They were actually one of the fastest groups I've ever seen to move between goals. They wanted to be housed outside the downtown core. That's why we had that rent gift. One of the surprising things we found is that a third were already parents themselves. And we were all shocked, including all the agencies providing services did not realize that. That was not on their data sets. And all the housing being developed for youth did not include a spare bedroom for their kids. And yet they were trying to get them back from Children's Aid. So Youth Opportunities Unlimited has now got housing for youth exiting homelessness where they can bring their kids. They had difficulties with structured programs. Their understanding of peer support was that they wanted, although they called it peer support, they wanted someone older than themselves who had exited homelessness. So the way we did peer support with this group was a little bit different because of what they said they wanted. Another example, work with homeless veterans. We did the first study in Canada on homeless veterans. We started asking veterans for their life story. How did they end up homeless, and what did they think would get them out of homelessness? Surprisingly, that the primary issue was not PTSD, such as is in the American literature. Not to say PTSD is not a problem. It's a problem for suicide, for family breakup, but they're saying it wasn't a problem for homelessness. They identified primary alcoholism. They often were found living in the rough, not and only occasionally use shelter use. So another one where your HIFIS data looks like infrequent visits to shelter. It's not infrequent homelessness. They're generally living in the rough. You'll find them in London. You'd find them along the river. We would use, again, housing first, harm reduction, addiction, reclaim identity. We took this, by the way, I forgot to mention, out to 4 sites, the London, Toronto, Victoria, Calgary. Prior to this, in the previous 5 years, they had been homeless an average of 6 times. We followed them for 2 years, had 86 people in the project across the country, only 1 returned to homelessness. So their understanding of peer support, different again. They wanted someone who understood military culture as well as homeless culture. They wanted someone who could bridge both worlds. Structure is really important. Anyone who was in the military, and I know there's some here, would have been annoyed that we started 5 minutes late today, right? They would notice that. They would notice if it was 1 minute late, right? And so I've done a subsequent project partnering with our legions to see where across the country are people most likely to access the Poppy Fund. And what we and then we went into the 10 communities identified by the legions to help the housing and homeless agencies better address the issue of homeless veterans. And in almost every case, it was the more rural areas. It wasn't Halifax, it was Saxville. It wasn't Winnipeg, it was Flin Flon and the Pas. In Ontario, we were in Thunder Bay. We also were in Niagara, but it wasn't Vancouver, it was Surrey. So it's where people have access to more living in the rough. In every of these 10 communities we went to, we found that connecting the veteran serving agencies and the homeless serving agencies was a missing part of the puzzle. Other populations, and I'm going to really speed up here around families. One of the differences with families, one of our largest growing groups of homeless, by the way, is it's almost the only group that will call a shelter first and say, is there any room at the inn? We decided to look at that as an opportunity to do whatever you could to avoid having that person come into the shelter. Instead, say, well, what can we do to stop it? And working with Mission Services and Roth Home in London, we found that over 90% of the time they could be diverted from not coming into the shelter by dealing with the rent and arrears, the landlord issues, etc., rather than saying, come on down, look at this as an opportunity to, because they often gave 5 days notice. If it was 1 day's notice, you might be a bit stuck. So with the study, we followed people for 18 months, and we only kept 90% in our sample. We couldn't find 10% of them, but of the 90% we did find, that's why I say at least 90, they were all still housed. So by creating that one crisis, because that was one of the questions, is did we just postpone it and 3 months later they're homeless anyway? So 90% of the time, if they called, they did not end up at the shelter, and 18 months later, at least 90% were still housed. And then what they did, rapid access to advocate for the system, dealing with landlords, address rent, utilities and arrears, rapid rehousing. We also took a subset of that to find out who didn't call, and we found it was primarily people who were new to the area and or had language issues. Some of the issues that were causing this were conflict, loss of employment, relationships, child concerns. We actually had several examples of people moving communities because of school problems. This was a population that had great problems dealing with conflict. Chronic homelessness, I think we're going to be probably hearing about this in a number of other areas. We certainly heard a lot of it in the earlier thing today, but just the important message here is to pay attention to the transition to housing to homed. And homelessness, in summary, can be addressed. It's important to understand that it relates to policy, and don't blame the individuals as the cause. We heard earlier from Tracy about this issue of respect, and I think this is foundational to the respect. Don't blame the individual. Because if they weren't homeless, if there's that difference between the chairs and the people circling, if they're not, somebody else is, right? Have strategies that cross sectors. And the strategies have to be about increasing those chairs, which is the available housing, decrease the people circling, and paying attention to transitions. Consider the differences with common subgroups. You still have to take it to the individual, but understanding groups, subgroups, get you closer to the individual. And evaluate and revise constantly. What worked yesterday, last year, may not work today because policies are constantly changing. Get constant input from people who have the lived experience as well as frontline staff, because they're going to tell you what's changed. This is archaeological evidence that musical chairs has been played for many, many years, and it's time to play a new game. So, bit of time for questions? Yeah.
Hello? Okay.
Oh,
so I have one client who's being evicted because she has psychological issues in that she doesn't know how to interact respectfully, and so the landlords are evicting her because she's forced out. And and the issue is coming from the disability that she has.
Right.
So as a litigator, I'm now going to advocate for her. However, I'm having issues in accessing the records to prove the disability that she has. Is there any kind of way that or any kind of system that exists that would the ability to share that information so that
Form 14 under the Mental Health Act. Form 14 under the Mental Health Act. That allows mental health care providers to share information, and it's available on the web. Okay, one more quick one because I know we want to get on time. You're okay? Okay. On the poppy money, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And interestingly, the reason we ended up partnering with the Legions on this is when we talked to the homeless veterans about what services they did access, that was one of the most common things they did access was the Poppy Fund. So it's a very critical resource. But having done work with veterans, I also have to say it's one of the best resource groups of any group I've ever worked with that's homeless. Although they are often living in the rough, and in fact we found small camps of people where they would have the clipboard and who's cooking which day. But the amount of money, if they do get the VAC money, is actually much higher than OW and ODSP. But they often have not accessed it. They're only accessing things like the Poppy Fund. But very important, it helps solve, when we went to the 10 communities, it helps solve homelessness within the whole community if you can have a subgroup actually access some funds that they're actually entitled to. We actually had several of our veterans we work with, when they got the back pay, actually had enough to purchase a home. And any of you working with the homeless, that does not happen in any other subgroup, right? It never happens. But when the homeless sector didn't recognize that someone was a veteran and it did not apply for the appropriate funds to them, then they're competing for the same chairs as someone on OW. Which makes, so again, if you're looking at it from a system perspective, that makes absolutely no sense, when in some cases they actually ended up with enough money to purchase a home. Okay, any other questions? Yep. Sorry, what was the question? Why doesn't the president help with homeless people? So the president, okay, like the prime minister. Yeah, so we have seen some progress in this area in that we now have a national policy again on homelessness. We had about a 20-year gap of not having a national policy on homelessness. So we do have that now, and Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation has now been, and it's not HPS, the new name is Reaching Home, now has additional funds. So we are seeing some additional funding at the federal level, but because of this downloading in Ontario, the main responsibility is at the municipal level. But we are seeing some funds coming through all levels of government, and I would say certainly more progress than we've seen for some years, which is a pretty low standard, because we were at the point where even the CMHC library in the previous government ended up losing their funding. So we didn't even have literature left on housing in Canada. So that's all been put back in place. But it's a far reach from where we were in the 1990s, where at the federal level was running all the housing programs across the country. Okay. So.
Thanks so much, Cheryl. Anyone who works in the field, we just know that Cheryl provides us with really good research, and it's something that we rely on. So thanks so much for sharing your insights. So now we have an opportunity to actually get back into our small group discussions. And slight change from this morning because primarily of the acoustics and just how awesome you all are to actually spend your day with us here. Way more people, which is amazing, but more people in the small group discussions than we had anticipated. So thanks so much for that. We're going to try our best to create a little more of an intimate experience so you'll get to hear one another. But the 4 topics that will be addressed in the small group discussion, the first one, from crisis supports to prevention, opportunities for early intervention and diversion, and that will be facilitated by Katie. So where's Katie? Katie, over here. And then we have exploring seniors' homelessness, and David will be the facilitator for that. Hello, David. Promoting community health and well-being to prevent chronic homelessness. We have Pamela. Where's Pamela? Excellent, right down here. And then an innovation station where we want to create new opportunities for affordable and supportive housing projects. And I'm not sure who's facilitating that one. Adam? Adam is facilitating that one. So just a reminder, as we shared this morning, this sort of cafe-style breakout discussions, your facilitator will likely create subgroups so that you can have that intimate conversation. You will have a participant worksheet where you can still add in your thoughts, your priorities, some of the challenges, and we'll be collecting those individual worksheets at the end as well. So multiple ways of participating, either directly in the conversation or through these workshops. And we'll only be doing one discussion group this afternoon, so you'll have plenty of time to be heard. And so select the topic that you're feeling most passionate about and join your facilitator towards the back of the room or along the side here. You'll see the posters up as to what topics they're dealing with. And I'll ask the facilitators actually to let people know when it's time to take a break. So we're going to regroup here by 3 o'clock and just do a wrap up for today. As well as gathering the summaries from all of your discussion groups. And Laura likely has more information for us, do you? No? Okay, so you have about an hour to complete this small group discussion. Thanks, folks.
Individual coming in to meet with us. I first met our keynote speaker back in 2017 in Winnipeg at the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness Conference, and was absolutely blown away by the presentation that he gave. He's all the way originally from Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, and is a Métis Cree individual with so many stories and so much teaching, so much knowledge, that he actually had to put it in print for us. If you get a chance to take a look at his book, which is climbing the charts, as they say, take a look at that. He has won a Governor General's Academic Medal back in 2016, and also the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Scholar, and is a Vanier Scholar, and is going to be presenting tonight on the different dimensions of Indigenous homelessness through lived experience and life story. His work involves teaching and working with contemporary Métis communities that are suffering the effects of intergenerational trauma. He's also the National Representative for Indigenous Homelessness for the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness. Please join me in welcoming my friend, Jesse Thistle. We don't have a mic stand, so you're on your own.
Hello, I got a presentation. I have to get my USB in here. Thank you for that introduction. My community would just say I'm a storyteller. my wife too, I'm sure. So that's what I go by. I always center my presentations from my own lived experience. That's what I'm known for. So what I'm going to do is just run through some stories that I've collected through my time, and also people that I've spoken with in my work. It's under Brantford. There we go. Yes. There we go. Everybody loves Boney M in here, or what? Okay, thank you very much. All right, thanks. So, different dimensions of Indigenous homelessness through lived experience and life story. And sorry, I've got a cold. I came down with it on the weekend. One of my greasy university students must have gave it to me last week on my first day on the job. So, right in time for my book tour too, you know. I remember when I was a child, the smell of my grandmother's butter tarts would fill the house during Christmas. With the oven turned up to 400, the aroma of golden brown sugar and pastry made my mouth water. Boney M songs, of course, accompanied the baking. And laughter, ceaseless laughter, from all my relatives, uncles, aunts, cousins, and neighborhood kids. And cigarette smoke. Cigarette smoke so thick it looked like we were in the middle of a forest fire. The air was so blue and polluted you could barely see past the kitchen table. Those were the 80s. And I'm sure you all remember it too. That's what I remember from my grandparents, who were white, Cyril and Jackie Thistle, in my place in Brampton, Ontario. And that's what I still think of as home. Today my home is in the Hamilton, with my wife Lucy. We just moved there, with her flaming red hair. There she is right there. My cat Poppy and her morning meows, in academia, where I'm an assistant professor in Métis Studies, Homelessness and Prairie History in the Department of Equity Studies at York University. But finding home wasn't always easy for me. I have a past, a dark past, that if you knew me back when I was struggling, you'd be surprised I ended up as a prof in Canada's third largest university. I lived on the streets a decade ago, in and out of jail, and was addicted to drugs and alcohol. Shelters, the top of building staircases, on friends' couches, and in tiny revolving door rooms all over the city was where I laid my head most of the time, when I wasn't incarcerated. I lived like that since I was 20, when my grandparents kicked me out of their house, until I was 32, and I finally found my way to rehab and sobriety. I've told my life story, as Mr. Passmore has said, at other keynotes and online, so I won't bore you with all the details here. I'll just focus on the crucial ones that'll help me impart what the concept of home is to me, what it means, and how Indigenous people like me have a hard time finding home when the sector focuses more on brick and mortar structures than it does on relationships, connection, and love. Looking back on my life, however, I'm not sure that my grandparents' place was even my home. You see, when I was 3, my nuclear family, which were Métis Cree in Saskatchewan, fell apart. My dad was an Algonquin Scot with roots in Temiskaming, Ontario, and Cape Breton Island, Nova Scotia. He was raised and knew himself as a white dude, like my grandpa Cyril Thistle. And my dad wasn't very good to my mother. She was Métis Cree from the Métis Road Allowance community of Park Valley near Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. My parents stayed together for 4 years and had me and my 2 brothers in succession by 1976. Yet, a time came when my mom had had enough of my dad's yelling, his fits of rage, his drinking and drugging, and him wasting all the opportunity that came their way. So she took me and my brothers to Moose Jaw and tried to make a go of it on her own. The 4 of us did pretty good for a while. We ate food every day, slept in beds instead of on piles of dirty laundry, and my mom held down a steady job at a local restaurant and went to night school. But one day, Dad showed up. He looked better than usual. He had meat on his cheeks and his clothes were clean and his hair was spiffy, not like there. He told my mom he was doing good for once, and then asked if he could take us boys to Toronto with him. He said that he had a good job back east with his father and wanted to take us for a while, to give Mom a rest and have some father and son time. Mom must have been tired or something, being a single mom with no support and all that, because she let us go. We made it as far as Sudbury before Dad messed up and lost us 3 boys to the Children's Aid Society. He went on to rob a series of convenience stores and then went to jail. That was the last time I ever saw him. I don't recall very much of my early years in Saskatchewan before the split and transition, but what I do recall is broken love and broken promises. The bruises on my mom's face and the smell of my mother's hair. It smelled like the gum that you pick off pine trees in late summer, the kind that sticks to your fingers when you pull it apart. And I remember Dad's greasy handlebar mustache and how he looked like Johnny Depp in Blow, with his powder blue leisure suit and his big ideas about everything. He was kind of like a Lynyrd Skynyrd song turned all the way up on full blast, mixed in with pine cones and raccoon droppings. But it was my home, my raccoon droppings, my personal family train wreck of the 1970s, and I loved it. But it was doomed to fail, I guess. I don't remember too much of Sudbury after that, just going to CAS and my grandparents getting custody and taking us to Brampton, where I grew up with my 2 brothers. It's all a blur now, like a flash of lights and then the scene changes. Life at my grandparents' house was orderly. There was food and Macho Man Randy Savage and Labrador Retrievers and street hockey and lots of kids my age to play with. But something was missing, something crucial. I could never put my finger on it over the years, but I think I've done a pretty good job with it in my recent memoir, From the Ashes, published by Simon & Schuster. Note the shameless plug. Here are 2 stories from my book where I work out what home meant to me back then, when I was a child, and how I was disconnected in a way that still haunts me today. I'm 4 years old in the first story. It's called A Touch of Home. It's when my grandparents first got us. "Cyril," Grandma said to my grandpa, "my catalogs are missing again." Her permed hair bobbed as she lifted the Chesterfield cushions. "One of the boys keeps taking them and hiding them all over the house. And I need something." She stood, mouth open. "Maybe they have something to order too, Jackie." Grandpa smirked at me and returned to his egg and bacon breakfast. The fork and knife looked tiny in his elevator mechanic hands. I peered at my feet, which dangled in the chair next to him. His thumbs were about twice the size of my big toes. My eyes barely rose above the kitchen table. Grandma left us and went down to the laundry room. Her slippers slapped against her hard yellow calluses on her heels, like leather against wood. "What's the verdict, Jess?" Grandpa said. "Do you have something to order?" Before I could answer, Grandpa delivered a swift karate chop to my leg. Hi-ya! My knee jerked, I squealed with glee, and eggs spilled out of my mouth and down the front of my PJs. "Grandpa!" I shouted, half shocked, half laughing. Ketchup smeared all over my lips and chin. He just winked at me, looking like Popeye without his corncob pipe. His forearms were way bigger than Popeye's for sure. "Watch it, buddy," he said as he put up his dukes. I made mine and put him up like a little fighting Irishman. Grandma called upstairs, "Cyril, wait till you see this." I heard her heavy rhino steps, then saw her. She held the missing catalog in her hand. I found it behind the toy box. Look. She opened it and held it up, just like the last few times it went missing. She placed it in front of my grandfather on the table and pointed. The underwear section, the women's underwear section is ripped out. The whole section. "Well, I didn't do it. Must have been one of the boys," he said and laughed. "At least they took the best part." "Cyril!" Grandma looked disgusted. I pushed my eggs around to avoid eye contact, but she leaned forward and crossed her arms over the damaged magazine. "Jesse, Do you know who did this? Her brown rim glasses magnified her eyes. Grandpa turned to face me. No, Grandma, no. Yorkie, our dog, my most trusted friend and ally, came in and pooped right near the fridge, saving me from saying more. Grandpa pushed aside his breakfast, disgusted, and Grandma ran over as Yorkie scurried away with a guilty dog smile, his tail tucked between his legs. You see what happens when you boys don't walk 'em enough? Grandma grabbed a grocery bag from under the sink and dangled in my direction. Come and clean it up, boy. I usually woke up early and often was the first one up. It was something I'd learned to do while living with Dad. The first one up into the cupboards or fridge was often the first one to eat, and the first one to eat was often the only one to eat. But this morning at my grandparents', I stayed in bed, cozy, in my room, buried under my blanket, not worried about breakfast. My grandparents had lots of treats, and my instinct to be the first one up was giving way to a desire to sleep in. I awoke to find Grandma in my room. Jessie, time to get up. She put an armful of clothes on the chest of drawers and began folding sweaters. Aunt Sherry and Uncle John are coming over, and we've got to get you ready. My Aunt Sherry was my grandparents' only daughter, and my grandpa's favorite child by a long shot. She was the youngest and was pretty with long, flowing brown hair and beautiful hazel eyes. She always made us the best food when she came over. Fried chicken, pasta with salty cheese, and chocolate cake. Uncle John, her husband, was strong like a lumberjack. He cut wood with an axe, beard and all, at their house way out in the country. And I imagined he was so powerful because of all the delicious food my aunt would make him. I cleared the sleep from my eyes and sat up. Yorkie ran in, his tail wagging, tongue hanging out. He jumped on the bed to lick my face, and the sound of crunching echoed throughout the room. Crunch, 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 crunch. Everywhere he put his paw on the bed, the sound resonated. What the hell? Grandma said and turned to investigate the strange noise. Stop moving, dog, I pleaded silently. Yorkie continued to romp about. Grandma grabbed him by the scruff, threw him off the bed, and then reached down and pulled the covers back. I tried raking them back up, but she'd already seen. Strewn all around me were pages and pages of the Sears catalog. There must have been about 75 beautiful young underwear models nestled in my bed. It was you, Grandma said. Why? I tried to hide. I don't know. Grandma pushed aside the ripped pages and sat beside me on the bed. I like them, I whispered. Yorkie put his paw on the bed again. They remind me of my mom. They're beautiful. Grandma's sense curves and soft body had taken the place of my mother's, but they weren't the same. Mom's body was brown and lean. Grandma's was beige and chubby, with wrinkles and moles all over. I miss holding onto my mother's leg, nuzzling her breast, cuddling against her stomach. I missed the feeling of strength her being possessed, the sense of warmth and protection. No matter how hard I squeezed, Grandma just wasn't home. Oh, baby, Grandma said, and then leaned in and hugged me. So that's a story about when I was a little kid and what kids do when they miss their mother after traumatic separations, and how it actually looks, and how maternal touch is really home to children. The next story I'll read is some of the acting out that I did years later, searching for home. That gnawing ache that many kids I know who've lost their parents also have felt. It's called Robin's Eggs, and I'm around 8 years old in the story. Robin's Eggs. My friend Brian, who lived down the street, told me he had a secret one day, and that if I kept my mouth shut, he would show me. I promised not to tell a soul. And then Brian showed me a robin's nest in his backyard. Every day, Brian and his family put seeds beside the nest to feed the mother robin before she went foraging in the afternoon. She would leave the same time every day, 4:30 p.m. on the dot. I remember looking at those eggs and wonder. There were 3 of them, and they were so beautiful. Bright baby blue tucked into the yellow grass and mud of the nest. I imagine the eggs carefully positioned by their mother's feet, protected under her soft feathers, and guarded by her watchful eye. Brian's mother called him in for dinner. "I'll wait for you and watch the eggs while you eat," I said. Assured, Brian left. As soon as he did, I grabbed the eggs and I stuffed them in my sock and ran home. On the way, I slipped and fell and I broke the eggs. Shocked at what I'd done, I took my sock off and threw it in the sewer, and then hid in my grandparents' basement. About a half hour later, Brian and his parents, Mr. and Mrs. T, showed up at our door looking for me. Mr. T was a police officer, but was kind to me and my brothers, and sometimes even played catch with us neighborhood kids. Mrs. T was even nicer, always baking up batches of cookies for Brian and me when we played Montezuma's Revenge on his Commodore 64, the only high-powered computer on our street. My grandmother searched the house and found me behind a box, shaking. "I'm really sorry," I said when I was confronted about the eggs and told them what I'd done. Brian cried. He was heartbroken. "Why'd you steal the eggs?" Brian's mother asked. I broke down into a blubbering mess. The more they asked me, the more I bawled. But I didn't tell them why I did it. My grandparents gave me the licking of my life. It was the 80s after all. But I didn't break. I still didn't tell them why I stole those eggs. When I saw Brian the next day at school, he wouldn't talk to me. The truth is, when I saw those 3 eggs tucked into the nest, it reminded me of my brothers and our home in Saskatchewan. I thought of how much that Mother Robin loved those eggs and how well she and Brian's family took care of them, and I got jealous. The eggs had their mother, and me and my brothers didn't anymore. So I took those eggs. I thought if I had them in some way, I'd have the same love that the eggs had. That would mean in some way I'd have a mother's love again. So I struggled growing up. I stole, I broke eggs, I ripped up magazines, and I fought. And the fact that my dad disappeared in 1982, never to be seen again, added to my frustration. Like other Indigenous people who grow up outside their Indigenous community and without their nuclear parents, I had no idea who I was or where I fit in. Nor did I have any sense of myself as an Indigenous person. In high school, I used to tell people that I was Italian just to fit in. I'm not sure if anybody actually believed me though, but I really tried to like soccer, listen to Eurobeats, and wear shiny jeans like all the other Italian guys. I must have looked ridiculous, and being out of place led to some early experimentations with drugs and ended up with me getting kicked out of my house as soon as my teen years were over. It wasn't until 2011, when I'd been off the streets for a few years, when I started working for the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, where I was hired to write the definition of Indigenous homelessness in Canada, that I learned I wasn't alone in my childhood cultural dislocation, frustration, and imposter syndrome. Work in the homeless sector showed me that there were actually generations of Indigenous people who'd lost portions of themselves through the breakup of their families, destruction of their homes, residential schools, CAS, the 60 scoop, and now the millennial scoop, only to end up drifting around homeless like I did. When I first heard about the others, I remember wondering how many of them also had to watch Goodfellas on repeat, listen to countless hours of 1990s Eurobeat music, and watch hundreds of hours of soccer games they weren't really interested in like I did. Part of my job at the COH was to talk with other Indigenous peoples who'd experienced homelessness to hear their side of things, to see what they believed home and homelessness was, and how we could articulate their insights into policy. A quote from a 2013 interview I did with Rose Henry, an elder from the Sliamon First Nation near Vancouver, really stuck with me and changed my perspective. Quote, "I ended up homeless as a consequence of the 60s scoop. Going through the scoop left me wondering which world or culture I belonged in, white Canadian or First Nations community. I was torn between the two. It had a very damaging effect on me. Society told me you're brown on the outside and white in the middle. as Rose was brought up in a white home. I was confused and lost. It was this path that ultimately led to my life on the streets. My confusion about my identity was very damaging, end quote. Rose's quote speaks to a kind of cultural homelessness endured by Indigenous peoples that is hard to quantify in standard understandings of homelessness as being without a structure to live in. And it really resonated with what I felt growing up, knowing that I was an Indian living in suburban white Brampton, where I stuck out like a sore thumb. This is because she is describing something that isn't about being without a structure of habitation or brick and mortar home alone. Rose's homelessness, rather, is about something much deeper, existing in the world without a meaningful sense of home, herself, or connection to her birth parents. Rose's eventual unsheltered houselessness in adulthood, as she articulated in our conversation, happened as a result of the cultural homelessness she endured since being placed in a white home at age 8, just like me. This traumatic childhood dislocation from her Sliamon people left her without Indigenous identity, language, kin, culture, and connection to her traditional homelands. While speaking with her, I also found out that she too had similar but different stories of butter tarts, Labrador retrievers, searching for the touch of her mother, and of acting out and doing something like breaking eggs as a child like I did. Rose also told me that by the time she reached adolescence, it was all too much for her, and she drifted into addiction, never taking roots anywhere until she was in her mid-30s. The parallels to my own life blew me away. As I listened to Rose's words, it became clear that she became homeless in childhood, kind of like I did when my parents broke up. The houselessness we both endured as adults was only a symptom of our earlier loss of Indigenous culture and kin. Métis elder Joe Eagle Eyes Montoyas describes a parallel kind of dislocation, a disconnection from Creator and Indigenous spirituality. Joe, like Rose, was torn from his parents at a young age and raised in child welfare. Unlike me, however, Joe lived in a series of sexually and physically abusive white homes growing up. Joe never spoke of any of happy stories like I had of Christmases with my grandparents. He just never got that detailed about his life, and I knew not to ask him. The abuse was so severe and the daily work so grueling, Joe explained, that as a young man, he fled the foster care system and went in search of his birth mother. He'd always had visions of them embracing, crying, and forgiving, and trying for a better future together. So off he ran to Thunder Bay. He hitchhiked for a few months, and surprisingly, somehow, he found her. Where he came, however, she didn't want anything to do with him. She rejected him outright. She refused to hug him, and she said he was better off where he came from and to never contact her or her family again. He imagined the encounter going much differently, Joe told me, and I'm sure he believed his mom had yearned to find him over the years like he had for her. But things didn't work out that way. He suffered a kind of going home homelessness where he wasn't wanted. You see, sometimes CAS reunions aren't all roses and sunshines for disconnected Indigenous families. Sometimes they're icy and violent and cold for Indigenous children trying to return home. Sometimes there just isn't a home to go back to. The rejection was too much for him to bear. Joe's mind and spirit buckled and shattered, and he had a severe nervous breakdown by the time he was 18 years of age. After being housed in a mental institution for a few years, he was released onto the streets with no house, no family, no friends, and no institutional support. He had aged out of childcare and literally had nowhere to go. As I listened to Joe's story, I was reminded of the time my grandparents kicked me out and turned their backs on me when I was 20 for doing drugs. Drugs they believed that had turned my dad into a criminal and had taken him away. They couldn't tolerate me making the same mistakes. I ended up sleeping in a car for a few months on the banks of the Fraser River in BC in 1997, and so began my homeless career. Joe's story, of course, is far more tragic than mine. But I couldn't help noticing the echoes between us, the endless search for love that marked both of our lives. Joe came to depend on drugs and alcohol to numb his spirit and mind, a poly addiction that persisted for almost 2 homeless decades. My addictions almost lasted just as long. When we corresponded, when I gathered his story, we both had 15 years of sobriety between us. Only through help from mental health specialists and reconnecting with the land and Creator, Joe told me, did he recover, get housed, and stay off the streets for good. Joe's story reads, quote, "In 1990, I underwent an intense period of introspective learning whereby I accepted the idea of a higher power, Creator, understood the power of healing, began to appreciate the power of prayer, and incorporated the importance of sharing into my life. I also credit KMH as a secret to my transition from homeless addict to housed citizen. Nature, the Creator, and service to my fellow street family keep me vibrant and alive," end quote. Joe's homelessness, as with many residential and CAS survivors I've spoken with, was really about a total disconnection of spirit brought to bear by harmful colonial institutions that tried and failed to make them into assimilated Canadian citizens. It was also about compounding trauma and the inability to connect. In this way, I saw myself in Joe's story. Here again, we see that Joe's experiences digs much deeper than simply having nowhere to live. To him and other Indigenous peoples, their homelessness began when they lost an Indigenous cosmology and sense of belonging within an Indigenous community after being placed in non-Indigenous homes. The later houselessness that spawned from this disconnection would not have happened, I believe, if they had been spiritually grounded within their community since childhood. Furthermore, the dislocation of spirit and family also creates an imbalance of healthy mental faculties, I theorize, which manifest into readable psychological disorders from repeated bouts of trauma, racism, and exclusion. These exclusions leave sufferers feeling like they don't belong anywhere or can't navigate society, feeling like they never have the right conditions to survive or have a mind racked by traumatic memories and are never centered and confident in their daily lives. To Joe and other survivors, their homelessness was also about mental imbalance, loss of kin, no meaningful connection to land, and having nowhere to go after aging out of the system. Again, I saw many overlapping themes to my own transience in my 20s, my own time spent cycling in and out of the jail system, shelters, and detox facilities, years before I got my job working at the COH and York University. The dark times that were driven by the ghost of my father, wondering where my mother was, and wondering if I deserved to be loved. I've laid out some of my childhood and adult memories in today's keynote, the good and the bad, the tight pants, the missing parents, and the cultural confusion. And I did so to contextualize my experiences with the lives of 2 Indigenous elders who've lived a life close to mine. A life outside of the circle, a life away from the home fire. The disconnection from early childhood parental love is central in all of these accounts. That and the damaging effect this social amputation had on us, which led to our adult houselessness. Back in 2017, as Mr. Passmore has noted, based off people's experiences like I outlined today, I wrote something called the definition of Indigenous homelessness. The opening paragraph reads, "Indigenous homelessness is a human condition that describes First Nations, Métis, and Inuit individuals, families, or communities lacking stable, permanent, appropriate housing or the immediate prospects, means, or ability to acquire such housing. Unlike the common colonialist definition of homelessness, Indigenous homelessness is not defined as lacking a structure of habitation alone. Rather, it is more fully described and understood through a composite lens of Indigenous worldviews. These include individuals, families, and communities isolated from their relationship to land, water, family, kin, each other, animals, cultures, languages, and identities. Importantly, Indigenous peoples experiencing these kinds of homelessness cannot culturally, spiritually, emotionally, or physically reconnect with their indigeneity or lost relationships. In simplest terms, the definition captures Indigenous homelessness not as being without a brick and mortar home, but as a disconnection from the relationship web of all my relations due to processes of colonial interruption. All my relations, for those that don't know, is an Anishinaabe worldview. Virtually all the Indigenous people I spoke with had a similar worldview that imagines that all things living or inanimate are interrelated to one another. We are connected to the land, to animals, to spirits, to ancestors, to stories, to our teachings, to each other, to ourselves, and to the Creator. This is the circle of life, the interconnected circle of being. And Indigenous homelessness, as defined by the definition, articulates the harmful disconnection Indigenous peoples have had to endure over the years. The end result being First Nations, Inuit, and Métis homelessness as we see it today in our streets. I think there's 35% here in Bradford suffering from this. There are 12 such types of disconnections that I've come across in my work. They are depicted here in the artwork work of Caitlin Schwann, to be published next year through U of T Press. There's historic and contemporary geographic homelessness. Consider that a disconnection from traditional lands through settler displacements have unanchored many Indigenous cultures and represents the largest base kind of Indigenous homelessness. Historic and contemporary geographic homelessness both speak to the destabilization of knowledge systems embedded within the land and land-based teachings. Spiritual disconnection homelessness, which Joe suffered from, an Indigenous person's separation from Creator or Indigenous cosmology through colonial projects like residential schools, adoption, or alienation. Mental disruption and imbalance homelessness. This dimension highlights the loss of healthy mental functioning that occurs in Indigenous peoples after they've been subjected to the rigors of colonial pressures, policies of discrimination, racism, attempts at forced assimilation, and economic marginalization, which work to exclude Indigenous peoples in Canada. Cultural disintegration and loss homelessness. An Indigenous person or community's loss of Indigenous cultures, knowledges, identities, names, languages, gender roles, songs, traditions, rites of passages, kin groups, and broader community supports. The disintegration of culture dimension speaks to the loss of culture endured by Indigenous peoples across Canada. Overcrowding homelessness. The number of people and dwellings in Indigenous homes far exceeds that of the regular Canadian public, both in rural and urban settings, and their direct pathways to domestic violence, addictions, or breakdown of family dynamics over time. Relocation and mobility homelessness. Indigenous peoples experiencing mobility homelessness travel long distance and short geographic distances between urban and rural spaces. They travel for work, subsistence, health services, education, legal proceedings, childcare, ceremonies, recreation, affordable housing, and to see family and friends, which most of us take for granted. Going home homelessness, an Indigenous individual or family who've lived outside of their home community for work, health services, education, adoption, or to meet other needs, who return home, like Joe, and cannot secure a physical structure to live in due to bureaucratic barriers, uncooperative band councils, hostile community members, lateral violence, and cultural dislocation. Returnees are often seen as or dubbed as city Indians or outsiders and made to feel like unwanted outcasts. And when I think of that one, I think specifically of Joe and how painful it must have been for him to go home and not be wanted. And the next one is nowhere to go homelessness. This is a complete lack of access to stable shelter or relationships, literally having nowhere to go. Due to lack of kin supports, lack of knowledge or of emergency housing, lack of funds to pay for travel, community banishment, poor or no release planning from penal or health institutions, and the inability to rent or travel due to racial discrimination, even when they possess the funds to travel and rent. happened to me in Winnipeg as a lecturing MA student. I couldn't get a cab. I had to walk right across the town because of the racism that's there. Escaping or evading harm homelessness, Indigenous peoples fleeing unsafe or unhealthy homes to obtain a measure of safety and survival. Young people, women, and LGBTQ two-spirited people are those most affected by all forms of violence in Canada, and therefore are those often escaping harmful circumstances the most. Emergency crisis homelessness, natural disasters combined with bureaucratic red tape, a lack of will to help by governments, racism and discrimination by institutional employees, a breakdown of social support systems under extreme pressure, and a lack of emergency plans to deal with extreme situations cause emergency crisis homelessness. Examples of this kind of Indigenous homelessness include the repeated floods in the Attawapaskat First Nation Reserve, the 2017 BC fires, and the 2017 floods in Manitoba. Many of those families still don't have homes. And the last one is climatic refugee homelessness. Indigenous peoples whose lifestyle have been greatly altered by climate change. Perhaps hit hardest by this have been the Inuit people. Inuit have collectively endured a loss of shelf ice, rising sea levels, and drastic reorientation of migration patterns of animal populations due to annual increases in temperature caused by climate change. And I bet that young girl that is speaking at the UN right now could speak directly to this, because we're all going to be homeless soon if we don't pay attention. So these are the different kinds of Indigenous homelessness that we know of, that communities told me about. The kinds of disconnection that I, Joe, and Rose, and other Indigenous peoples like us faced, which led to our houselessness. I faced a total of 7 of these dimensions. Rose, 8, and Joe, 10. What is hopeful from all 3 accounts, and knowing of the various layers of Indigenous homelessness, however, and what I saved until now, is that all 3 of us got off the streets by reconnecting with our relationships, with our culture, family, and love, alongside receiving housing supports. We didn't do it by pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. Rose went to rehab, sobered up, and had a baby boy in her late 30s. She treated him like the parent she never had. She learned to love that boy, and from the community that rallied around her to house her. It showed her how to love unconditionally, and it gave her a real purpose in life, which motivated her to keep a roof over her head. She's been housed ever since. Rose is now a mother to many First Nations youth, like she was, on the West Coast, and is considered a matriarch to her nation. Furthermore, her hard-won experience is used to empower her people to fend off big oil in her ancestral homelands. She's a water protector. She's an inspiration to many because she knows that without our relations, we are nothing. We are homeless. Joe, as I've already described, found a connection to Creator through service to his fellow street family, by going back out onto the land, and by reconnecting with his Indigenous ceremony. He is a helper and a knowledge keeper, often feeding people monthly out of his own pocket in Victoria, British Columbia, where he leads by example, by bringing others out onto the land so that they can reconnect. And me, I went to rehab and learned to love myself again after serving others. After I graduated rehab, I went to university, where I learned about my maternal Métis history in undergraduate courses. I had great mentors who walked me through processes of understanding, and I saw how me and my brothers fit into the colonial narrative of Canada. I also began talking with my mother after years apart, and I came to forgive her for abandoning us. And when we first hugged in 2013, her hair still smelled like it did when I was 3, like that pine gum that sticks to your fingers when you pull it apart. Together, we've grieved my father's disappearance and opened a missing persons investigation, which opened the door to me visiting my family out west, who are Métis Cree. What is more, I married my wife, Lucy. the fire-headed goddess, and along with my cat Poppy, the two of them have taught me the meaning of love in our Hamilton home. And truthfully, I've never felt more connected to myself, my family, or my heritage in all my life. I now teach other Indigenous students how to reconnect with their history and culture in university, and some say that I've prevented years of homelessness for them, if they're on that path. In closing, I hope my talk today has shed some light on what Rose, Joe, and myself consider home and the various ways we were disconnected according to the 12 dimensions of Indigenous homelessness. I articulated them in a very matter-of-fact way: the loss of a mother's touch, loss of language, no kin support or connection to land or creator, loss of culture, no sense of ourselves as Indigenous peoples growing up, and the disconnection from knowing our people's history. For us, these things happened when we were children, when we were taken from our nuclear families and placed elsewhere, which happens a lot to Indigenous children, even today. Despite these monumental losses in childhood, we also somehow found small fragments of home and eventually rehoused us. A baby boy to care for, a wife to love, a cat to play with, a land to walk on and do ceremony, a community to contribute to, a rediscovered purpose in life, connection to Creator, and Rose's social belonging as a grandmother within the web of all my relations. But these were all very hard won. And they were connections that most housing programs think are secondary in importance. So in knowing all this, what I've shared with you today, I leave you with 3 fundamental questions. 1, isn't it time we built housing programs that value and protect these fragments of life that I just mentioned, that make up home, that we as Indigenous people already recognize? 2, isn't it time we put relationships first alongside the revolutionary benefits of housing first to permanently house our relatives still wandering homeless outside of the circle? And 3, isn't it time we focus on re-embedding Indigenous folks back into the web of all my relations and give Indigenous programs the money they need to do the hard work of reconnecting and rehousing? I certainly think so. And I say this knowing that these organizations already understand the problem. They're the ones who told me all this. They just don't have the money or capacity to do the work that needs to be done. We need to give them the money. Thank you for listening to me today. Miigwech, Marcy, thank you, Nyawan.
You take a few questions? Sure.
Okay, wow. Jesse, that was amazing. Every time I hear him speak, I just get more motivated and want to get back out there in front line. So, sorry, Tracy, I may have to jump ship and go back to frontline service again. Miigwech, merci, Nyawe, thank you so much for your words. The work that you've done has helped us in the Indigenous community serving people who have been marginalized for many years. And, 35% of your community here, 28% of the community in Hamilton, it goes on and on across our country. So having those dimensions for people to be able to understand, and you can look those up. If you can Google dimensions of Indigenous homelessness, definition of Indigenous homelessness, go to the Homeless Hub, go to the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness. Lots of place to find it. Dig in, read about it a little bit. We're going to take a few minutes, and Jesse's going to answer a few questions. We can only do a few because we could be here all night asking questions. We've got a lot of things to ask. So please, if you've got a few pressing questions, then we'll have to move on to the next section, which includes a break. So there's the carrot in front of the stick. Okay, questions?
And I don't bite, so don't be afraid. So, anything that stuck out at all? Yes. Far left. Yes. Well, I just put all my stuff out there from the beginning, and I didn't hide anything, and I was always very upfront and honest, and so I've made my career, and I've used that as a strength. So I the university, everybody knows. It's in a book. It's on the charts, and it's not like I'm teaching youth, right? I'm teaching adults. So, yeah, no, I had to be very honest from. Oh, did everybody hear that question? Oh, she asked how I got a job with a criminal record. And so what I did is I just put it all out there. I've been doing it since like 2013. You know, I've even like publicly talked about my criminal record and walked through each one of my charges. So, and what happened oddly is like I thought like I wouldn't get a job, but like people came to me like the SIU. I've trained the SIU in the province when they're dealing with homeless Indigenous people who are in crisis situations like I was. I wrote a definition of Indigenous homelessness that's helped people across the country get housed and find their relatives. I teach people about their history because I know what it's like not to have my history. So I've taken those like really negative experiences and used them as a positive. So it's a great question though. Oh, thank you. Yes.
Did you find that you sought out mentorship, or those people?
Well, like I've had mentors all the way from rehab. When I was court ordered to go to rehab in Ottawa for a year. And while I was in there, I started taking GED, and I was mentored through that, through guys that were in the program who are other struggling addicts, who had a little more sobriety time than me. And then the people that ran the GED program, this woman named Jill, she helped me through that. I took etiquette courses at Ottawa U, and I met a Dr. Jennifer Lennox-Terrian who taught me basically how to take care of myself again because I'd been wandering for so long. So every step of the way, kind of the programs I got into, I don't know if it was by luck or what, but there were people in there that saw that I was trying my hardest, and they rallied behind me to help me through. And when I got to university, my wife Lucy actually plugged me into the Indigenous community because she realized that there was something deeper about my identity that I needed to rediscover, and so she helped me get into the Indigenous programs at York. And there I met a wonderful woman named Carolyn Podruchny who taught Métis history, who really saw that I was disconnected, and so she connected me back into my family. That's actually how I went to Saskatchewan and met my family again. So all along the way, I've had what are like I consider angels helping me, or mentors, you know. But I now do that work for other students. So. Well, it's one of them. It's one of the keys. Now I understand with hindsight that those people helped repair relationships for me and helped me rediscover myself and my history. So now I'm trying to pay that forward by doing that with other people. Whether I'm as good as them, I don't know. You know, only time will tell. But I'm trying, right? And I think that's the point. So there also has to be a will to change too. Like I really worked hard, and I think that's what drew the mentorship to me. So. Not saying I pulled myself up by my bootstraps either, so thank you. One more question. Come on, guys. Yes. OSAP. OSAP, and I work construction. I worked construction the whole way through, and then I met Stephen Gates at the Homeless Hub, and I told him my story. After Dr. Jennifer Lennox-Terrian suggested that I go there. And Allison and Stephen hired me as an RA, and they gave me a lot of jobs I wasn't qualified to do, like write this definition. But it turned out okay, and that's how I supplemented my income. And my wife worked full-time for 7 years and put me through school. So now, yeah. Talk about someone who transformed my life was my wife, a mentor that I should have said first. Sorry. I'm going to get it when I get home now. Yes.
Yeah, what was the single most important factor that led you from that path you were on, homelessness, drug use, poverty law, to the path that you've been on the last 7 years?
The most important thing? Three most. Desperation. I had to be desperate. I knew I was going to die. I really knew I was going to die. I almost lost my foot. And so out of desperation, I robbed a store. And I used that as my way into the justice system. And through that, I was offered opportunities to get my teeth fixed, which I couldn't do while I was on the streets. I had access to medication, and I had a safe place to sleep. While I was in there, the judge, one of the judges who I came across, noticed that I was a horrible criminal. He's like, "You're not a professional. I know you're doing this because you're desperate. I'm going to give you a shot, and you can do your time at rehab." So I went from jail directly past go into rehab. And that was the only time I could ever do that. The whole time I was homeless with my leg. I had tried to access from detox centers, from shelters, Salvation Armies all over, and there was no way that I could get in. There's a waiting list. You know, they would say, "Oh, can you call us back in 6 months, Mr. Thistle?" I'm like, "I don't even know where I'm going to be tomorrow. How am I going to call you back in 6 months?" So that was the second feature. So desperation, the immediate bridge, and then when I got there, it was a tough program and I had to work for it. I really had to work for it. It was way harder than doing jail time, and I think the judge that sent me there, he knew that. He tricked me, that guy, you know. But it was the best trick ever, right? And so I learned to love myself, take care of myself in there. And I guess it would be through mentorship programs. So those are the three things, you know.
All right, thank you very much, Jesse. It's important, the one thing that I really took from this tonight, and there's always something different, were the words that you said when I see people on the street now, and I always remember now the words you said tonight about broken promises and broken love. And those are the things we need to repair. We need to help people get to the spot where they can repair those relationships with themselves, with their family, with their community, so they can get back to the fire. So thank you very much, Jesse. One more time for Jesse Thistle.